Hi, it's Olivia Munn with my shelter pets, Frankie and Chance. Say hi, guys. When I adopted them, I discovered that they both have incredible personalities. Chance's sole purpose in life is to love and to be loved. Frankie is a little bit of a scoundrel and always entertaining. They're a little bit of a lot of things, but they're all pure love. Adopt pure love at theshelterpetproject.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council, the Humane Society of the United States, and Maddie's Fund.
COVID-19. Can the world reopen for business?
Give us a sense of how you're ramping up and taking care of folks on the ground.
What's the long-term impact?
Why will we not see a V-shaped recovery?
When will there be a cure or a vaccine?
How can you model that at a time when it's unclear whether we're going to see a resurgence in viruses?
The answers will emerge.
Can you give us a sense of timing?
And you'll find them here. Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
If you love them enough to listen to them practice the same song on tuba,
Please be done.
over and over and over and over and over, then surely you'll check NHTSA.gov/the right seat to make sure they're correctly buckled in the back seat.
Sounds good, honey.
Check today at NHTSA.gov/the right seat. Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
In-depth analysis.
You know that feeling when you get more than you expected? Like discovering that the box of chocolates has a whole other layer underneath? Or scoring extra poppadoms with your takeaway? Or joining Tesco Mobile and finding out you get the latest phones and 99% UK network coverage? Yeah, that moment feels good, right? Tesco Mobile. Every little helps.
99% 4G population coverage indoors and outdoors across UK.
Where will 2020 take you? Somewhere where people care. About each other. About our planet. About creating a better world for everyone. And becoming the best versions of yourselves. Join a community of like-minded individuals at the University of Winchester. Make sure to accept your offer by the UCAS deadline and visit our website to find out more. See the bigger picture. Be the difference. Go to winchester.ac.uk.
The IBM Flash storage solution can be broken down into 3 S's. Speed. Retrieve data fast. Scalability. Grow your storage as your business grows. Simplicity. Easily migrate and integrate with existing systems. Oh, and there's a 4th. It's surprisingly affordable, with a recommended monthly price of £200 for 26 terabytes. Order by the 30th of June and pay nothing for 90 days. Visit ibm.biz/flash offer now.
Picture this. Small businesses on eBay are working to
Get things moving.
Sending spices to novice cooks.
Airbags to kids.
Desks for home offices.
Delivering the goods.
Shipping footballs.
Fruit trees.
And dishwashers.
Thousands of small businesses on eBay are helping to keep the nation going. They are individually brilliant, stronger as one. Buy, sell, eBay.
Who says you can't have a laugh while getting serious about America's pastime? On the daily podcast Locked On MLB, comedian and baseball fanatic Paul Francis Sullivan talks about each team, each pennant race, and everything else in the game, from rule changes and controversies to baseball cards and stadium food.
For those of you who are not familiar with me or the old show, I love to obsess over baseball. I'm talking baseball over the Super Bowl. We had a TV showing the division series during my wedding.
Search Locked On MLB on TuneIn to listen today.
Trey Wingo here from ESPN's Golic and Wingo. Every morning, Mike Golic Jr. and I sit down to discuss all the news, drama, and highlights spinning the sports world that day. And with TuneIn, you can hear us whenever and wherever you go. Just search Golic and Wingo and start listening today.
Are you fully informed on the NBA? On the NBA Hangtime podcast, veteran sports writers Sekou Smith and John Schumann analyze the latest NBA news, storylines, and discussions with guests from around the basketball universe.
Isaiah Thomas joined us here on the Hangtime podcast. Isaiah, good morning.
Everybody's doing well. As you know, my daughter tested positive.
Search NBA Hangtime on TuneIn to listen.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
Okay, here we go.
With the NFL Draft in the books and the schedule set, check out a TuneIn podcast for daily updates on the lead up to the 2020 season, like the Ringer NFL Show, where a rotating cast of Ringer experts talk with players, coaches, and special guests about the NFL landscape.
A lot of the other teams that we consider...
Or ESPN's NFL Live.
If there are some delays because of the COVID-19...
Search sports on TuneIn to explore these pods and much more.
Lines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Stocks are extending the global rally as investors cling to optimism. A quick economic recovery from the pandemic will occur. The S&P is headed for its fourth straight gain. Gold, treasuries, and the dollar are down, with the greenback hitting its weakest since early March as investors turn away from havens after data on U.S. private payrolls showed fewer job losses than forecast in May. We check the markets every 15 minutes, with the S&P up 0.8% of 25. The Dow's up over 1%, up 263, and the Nasdaq's up 0.4%, up 42. The 10-year's down 30 seconds now, with the yield at 0.75%. West Texas Intermediate crude's up 0.25% at 36.88 a barrel. The COMEX gold is down over 2% at 16.98.80 an ounce. The dollar yen 108.74. The euro $1.2222. And the British pound $1.25.79. U.S. service providers started to emerge in May from a pandemic-induced tailspin as nationwide lockdowns on business and social interaction begin to lift. The ISM says its non-manufacturing index rose 3.6 points to 45.4. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. I'm Greg Jarrett.
This is Bloomberg Markets with Lisa Abramowitz and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
We did get that ADP report out earlier today that showed a much better than expected, or less terrible report than people were expecting when it comes to job losses for the month of May. A big question, though, is the composition of job losses, as well as what may come if the economy doesn't recover in a V, as many people don't expect that it will. Joining us now to discuss is Yelena Shugyetyeva. She is a senior U.S. economist with Bloomberg Economics. You had a report that I found fascinating about how the bulk of the job losses so far have been blue-collar workers, but that could change in the upcoming months. Can you give us a sense of how?
Yes. Hi, Lisa. So as you pointed out, we all know that, in terms of overall job losses, we may see smaller job losses coming up. And the ADP report this morning was just one piece of a puzzle. The big question to us is how much this weakness that we observed in March and April is going to spread across different sectors of the economy and across different roles in those sectors that were already hit hard. So, for example, if you see there was a lot of layoffs among blue-collar jobs in the sectors such as leisure and hospitality and accommodation, those sectors did not see a comparable decline in terms of white-collar positions. So we expect that if we don't see much of an improvement in those sectors' activity, that some of these white-collar jobs are at risk of being lost. So another thing that we looked at in our report that we published recently is that a lot of the impact is coming from the industries that were already hit hard. As I mentioned, leisure and hospitality, trade, retail trade in particular. So how this sector's weakness is impacting demand for other industries, services, and products. And we found out that as many as 6 million jobs are at risk on that front.
So, Yelena, looking at today's ADP jobs numbers, came in at 2.76 million jobs lost, and the consensus was 9 million. That seems like a big miss to me. Is this something strange in the numbers this month, or is the jobs market maybe less bad than we had anticipated?
Less bad is probably what you would like to call it. So the improvement was expected. The question is to what extent. So we already saw some improvement in terms of the claims data last week. Continuing claims declined for the first time since February, essentially, and tomorrow we will see if that trend continues. So it was pretty obvious that the labor market is starting to recover to some extent. Again, the big question is how much it spreads across different roles and industries, and how much loss in aggregate demand will impact the job market going forward. So you brought up the ADP report this morning, but if you look at the details, we see declines all across different sectors. Financial activities declined. That was not that different from the previous month's decline. Professional and business services, and this is what we found is at highest risk going forward. So will we see consumers continue to spend at the same rate? Probably not, because there was a lot of income lost over this last few months. So I think, unfortunately, despite all this relatively positive news, there's still a lot of jobs at risk in the next few months.
Yelena, I was really struck by just how better than expected it was, or less bad than expected it was, the ADP report. And I'm wondering if this tells us something about either the pace of our hiring, which is a really fuzzy metric that doesn't have a lot of hard data around it, or another measure that perhaps analysts are getting wrong. Or I wonder if the takeaway is it is just incredibly difficult to pinpoint with any accuracy what's going on right now in the economy, because the job losses have been so swift and so severe that when you're talking millions, it's throwing a dart at a dartboard. Is that the takeaway here?
I think you are quite right, Lisa. So, think about what we did before the crisis, right? We were talking about difference in a forecast in terms of thousands, but now we talk in terms of millions. And obviously today's report, ADP report, is one step in the right direction. And again, I mentioned claims data is something that we really take a close look at as well. And that is also showing we're at a turning point. So payrolls report will probably show a smaller decline in terms of the number of jobs from the establishment survey. But one thing that will worsen in May, and it seems to be a consensus view as well, that the unemployment rate will get to the levels last seen during the Great Depression. So we are probably going to see the unemployment rate close to 20%. So on that front, it's probably not that much of an improvement. And again, the breadth of job losses is what really worries me at this point.
Yelena, thanks so much for joining us. We always appreciate your thoughts on the economy. Yelena Shuliatyeva, senior U.S. economist for Bloomberg Economics, giving us her thoughts on the jobs market. Again, better than expected ADP jobs numbers today. We're going to have jobless claims tomorrow, Thursday, as always, and then Friday, the jobs number from the federal government. We'll have all that for you on Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Money Minute. The momentum continues despite mounting geopolitical and social risks. Stocks are higher with investors optimistic of a quick economic recovery from the pandemic. The Dow up 260 points. Zoom has transformed the hype into a huge jump in sales and customers. The virtual meeting software company said that revenue soared in the most recent quarter. It's become an essential service, attracting more than 300 million participants some days. That's up from 10 million in December. Tyson Foods will return to its pre-COVID-19 absentee policy, which includes punishing workers for missing work due to illness. Some of America's largest meat suppliers reopened plants recently after a wave of coronavirus outbreaks forced temporary closures in April. And luxury giant LVMH's $16 billion deal to buy Tiffany is uncertain. That's according to Women's Wear Daily. Directors are said to be concerned about the pandemic's disruption to the U.S. economy. Courtney Donahoe, Bloomberg Radio.
Not completing high school is more of a social thing than it was an academic thing. Even though all these years have passed, I still had that longing to have my diploma.
At age 30, Carissa finished her high school diploma.
If you're even considering getting your high school diploma, you can do it.
No one gets a diploma alone. If you're thinking of finishing your high school diploma, you have help. Find free adult education classes near you at finishyourdiploma.org. That's finishyourdiploma.org. Brought to you by the Dollar General Literacy Foundation and the Ad Council.
If knowledge is power, the Bloomberg Terminal is your power up, connecting you to real-time financial data, market-moving news, powerful analytics, and an influential network of financial decision makers around the world. Share ideas, negotiate trades, and gain the insight you need to make more informed decisions. See how the terminal can take your workflow to the next level at Bloomberg.com/professional.
How long? This is an important update from the government about coronavirus. We all need to stay alert so we can control the virus and reduce the risk of infection. Staying alert means you must stay at home as much as possible. Work from home if you can. Limit contact with others. Keep your distance if you go out. And wash your hands regularly. Do not leave home if you or anyone in your household has symptoms. Stay alert. Control the virus. Save lives.
Where will 2020 take you? Somewhere where people care. About each other. About our planet. About creating a better world for everyone. And becoming the best versions of yourselves. Join a community of like-minded individuals at the University of Winchester. Make sure to accept your offer by the UCAS deadline and visit our website to find out more. See the bigger picture. Be the difference. Go to winchester.ac.uk.
The IBM Flash storage solution can be broken down into 3 S's. Speed. Retrieve data fast. Scalability. Grow your storage as your business grows. Simplicity. Easily migrate and integrate with existing systems. Oh, and there's a 4th. It's surprisingly affordable, with a recommended monthly price of £200 for 26 terabytes. Order by the 30th of June and pay nothing for 90 days. Visit ibm.biz/flash offer now.
Picture this. Small businesses on eBay are working to
get things moving.
Sending spices to novice cooks.
Hairbands to kids.
Desks for home offices.
Delivering the goods.
Shipping footballs.
Fruit trees.
And dishwashers.
Thousands of small businesses on eBay are helping to keep the nation going. They are individually brilliant, stronger as one. Buy, sell, eBay.
Let's be honest, we all spend too much of our day on social media. But at least you can spend your endless scroll time to discover new things on TuneIn. Follow @TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to always be in the know about the best new stuff streaming in the app. From breaking news stories and live sporting events.
Yeah, but it's unique times. I think there's unique circumstances, and we're trying
to stand out stations and podcasts. Stay in touch with TuneIn.
Wanna bet football can make you feel nostalgic?
Playing days are over, so...
On the podcast, NFL alum to talk about their careers, life after football, and everything in between.
This is Darren Waller. Good to have you.
Yes, sir. It's good to be here.
Dana White, welcome to the Alumni Lounge.
Thanks for having me, brother.
Big member of our NFL alumni family, the CEO of the XFL, Mr. Oliver Luck.
We're here with the president, Mr. Eric Price. Good to see you.
Search NFL Alumni Lounge on Tune to listen.
Brian Windhorst and the Hoop Collective Podcast.
What about Giannis Antetokounmpo? He is going to be eligible to sign a Supermax extension, which we were projecting to be worth $240 million this summer. Well, if the salary cap drops, and even if he's wonderfully happy in Milwaukee, it may make no sense for him to sign when he can just wait a year and wait for the revenues to recover and then lock in.
Subscribe to Brian Windhorst and the Hoop Collective.
Search the Hoop Collective to listen.
With millions of podcasts dropping new episodes all the time, how do you keep up with all your favorites? TuneIn makes it easy. Simply head to the home screen and find your new episode section to see the latest additions.
Broadcasting live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 1061 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Markets.
Coming up, we'll take a look at the federal and state response to protest, as well as some of the rioting and looting that has happened independent of some of the more peaceful protests. Plus, we've got a conversation with Chris Alman, Chief Investment Officer at Kelster's Investments. Right now, though, let's head over to Greg Jarrett for a Bloomberg Business Flash. Greg.
Stocks are still headed higher, Lisa. The S&P and the NASDAQ are gaining for the fourth straight day as ongoing signs of economic recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic is bolstering sentiment on Wall Street. Stocks advanced also after private payrolls data from ADP showed a decrease of 2.76 million jobs in May, and that was a drop that was smaller than the consensus. We check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg Radio. S&P 500 is up 0.9%, up 29. The Dow is up 1.25%, up 315. The NASDAQ's up 0.5%, up 50. The 10-year is down 23 seconds. The yield is 0.76%. West Texas Intermediate crude has ventured into the red. It's down 0.4% at $36.67 a barrel. COMEX gold is down 2.4% at $16.9270 an ounce. The dollar yen stands at 108.71. The euro is $1.1228. The British pound $1.2582. CBOE Global Markets is postponing the reopening of its options exchange trading floor until June 15th, citing limited access to the area surrounding its Chicago office building amid citywide protest. The floor was originally set to open on Monday. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. I'm Greg Jarrett.
You're listening to Bloomberg Markets with Lisa Abramowitz and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
There are a lot of questions about the protest that was cleared away for President Trump to make his way over to a cathedral for what a lot of people call a photo op. Who actually ordered military members to clear the area with force, given the fact that they were protesting peacefully by many accounts, although different accounts are disputed by different people. President Trump saying that he didn't order authorities to do so. Meanwhile, we have the head of the military coming out and saying that he wasn't responsible either. Joining us now for a better sense of who was responsible, as well as exactly what the plan is going forward, is Roxana Tiran, defense reporter for Bloomberg News. Roxana, could you just lay out what exactly happened and who is responsible?
Sure. It's good to be with you. So Secretary of Defense Mark Esper just finished a press conference. And it was clear from the press conference that it was not members of the military. He said that it was Park Police who violently cleared the protesters from in front of the White House in Lafayette Park, and that he was not aware of plans to do so. So he had not been briefed ahead of time. So basically, it looks like responsibilities being shifted from one place to another at this point. But it's definitely not members of the National Guard or other military members. So Secretary Esper said that it was definitely Park Police, and he was not aware of the plans. So he also just came out to basically state very strongly that he does not believe that active duty troops need to be deployed to quell protests in the United States. So he basically openly does not support invoking the Insurrection Act.
All right, so Roxana, let's go a little deeper in that part here, because President Trump has publicly stated that he wants governors, and he wants to quote-unquote dominate protesters, and he wants the governors to do more. What options does he have from a military perspective to overlay federal troops, if you will, to kind of put down some insurrections if, in fact, we get to that point?
So at this point, the National Guard seems to be best suited to peacefully sort of monitor the protest, is what Secretary Esper said. And he said that that's basically the only option that he's backing at the moment. Under the Insurrection Act, the president can deploy active duty military if he feels that to conduct basically to carry out law enforcement operations and arrests that are otherwise prohibited under the law. But if he could do that, the law leaves the door open for Trump to do that without governors asking for that kind of support. It has been done in the past. The last time that the Insurrection Act was invoked was in 1992 during the LA riots, but that was at the request of the California governor. So the question now is whether President Trump is going to back off the idea of using active duty military to quell the protests. He doesn't have the support of the Defense Department. It's very obvious from the press conference today. Secretary Esper stated very clearly that he does not support invoking the Insurrection Act and that he thinks National Guard troops are best suited for this. So they National Guard troops obviously mostly serve at the at the command of the state governors. In D.C., it's a little bit different. So I think that you might see this idea of using active duty troops sort of cool down a little bit.
Just quickly here, Roxana, I've been interested in the process of military members and how they would coordinate with other defense operations within a state or within a city, the police officers, the National Guard. Who coordinates this? And if it's not coordinated, how effective could it even be?
That is a good question. I actually, obviously, all the military part of it. So National Guard and potentially active duty troops obviously would be coordinated through the Defense Department. Now, the question is whether the Department of Justice is the sort of overarching, coordinator in this issue, but it's not very clear to me.
Roxana Tehran, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your thoughts and perspective on this developing story. Roxana Tehran, defense reporter for Bloomberg News. And Lisa, this is a big issue, and there are political ramifications, there are legal ramifications. And fortunately, we have Harvard Law professor and Bloomberg opinion columnist Noah Feldman. He's going to join us later in the show to kind of dig into the legal aspects here of deploying military force as it relates to some of these protests around the country.
Well, on a state versus city level alone, there are some questions of authority for New York State, for example, to bring in National Guard to New York City. It would have to be coordinated by Governor Cuomo, and he would have to take over control by Mayor de Blasio, setting up yet another fight between them. You have to wonder what layer of power struggle are you going to give, given the fact that the military could potentially get involved. It's just sort of head spinning at a time when finally we are seeing things start to calm down, Paul.
Yeah, and we are. And, we saw last night was much calmer across the country, particularly in New York City, but other places as well. So very, very good to see. Hopefully that continues. Right now, let's head down to Washington, D.C. for world and national headlines with Nathan Hager. Nathan, what do you have for us?
Well, Paul, the latest development regarding this flap over the photo op outside the historic church near the White House. President Trump says he didn't order authorities to clear the protesters from the park. In a radio interview with Fox News, the president also says police and the Park Service didn't use tear gas, though reporters and a priest who was removed from St. John's Church have described it that way. Still, Mr. Trump says the massive deployment of National Guard and federal law enforcement in the nation's capital was an example the rest of the country can follow. That get tough approach is facing a growing backlash, though, including from one of the president's staunchest evangelical supporters.
He said, I'm ready to send in military troops if the nation's governors don't act to quell the violence that has rocked American city. Matter of fact, he spoke of them as being jerks. You just don't do that, Mr. President. It isn't cool.
That was Pat Robertson on his 700 Club broadcast. Governors haven't taken the president up on that military offer. Now White House officials tell the Associated Press he's privately backing off the idea. A family is mourning a retired police captain who died during looting in St. Louis early yesterday morning. 77-year-old David Dorn's daughter, Larissa Holmes, says her father was killed defending a friend's pawn shop.
He was trying to talk them down. I know that that's like in his nature. Like, you don't need to be doing this. This is not something you need to do. You should go home. This is not safe. And the situation just escalated.
Dorn's final moments were apparently shown on Facebook Live, but that video has been taken down. Global News on Air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries.
Elite advisory firms rely on BNY Mellon's Pershing to meet the needs of their most complex clients. Karen Novak, Chief Operating Officer at Pershing Advisor Solutions, explains how.
At BNY Mellon's Pershing, we bring customized insights and strategies to help you grow your advisory business and stay on the leading edge. We can support the needs of your most sophisticated clients with a full range of investment and wealth management solutions, from access to private banking to consolidated bank and brokerage custody. Learn why so many of the largest advisory firms turn to us for the financial strength and high-touch service that BNY Mellon's Pershing can provide. Are you well positioned to stand out from your competition?
Learn more at Pershing.com or call 800-445-4467. Brokerage custody provided by Pershing LLC and other services provided by Pershing Advisor Solutions LLC. Both members of FINRA and SIPC. Private banking and bank custody provided by BNY Mellon N.A. Member FDIC.
Jenny Liss, Jewish communal leader and philanthropist, talks about why she chose the Jewish Communal Fund for her family's charitable giving.
For a lot of people, it would be the convenience factor. I don't have to track anything.
If charitable giving is an important part of your life, JCF can help you organize your philanthropy with our donor-advised fund. A fund can be established with a minimum tax-deductible contribution of $5,000. Make grants to your favorite charities, and JCF handles all the administration and reporting.
At the year end, our board awards community grants, from fees and endowment income to UJ's annual campaign. We also make gifts to specific organizations, the elderly, Holocaust survivors, the hungry. The fact that we come together as a community at the end of the year to build community, that's what makes us different.
Get better at giving back. To find out more about JCF's impact, visit jcfny.org and download the Giving Report. JCF, we have a gift for giving.
Are you interested in a challenge?
TfL has a plan to help London reopen carefully, safely and sustainably. You can do your bit by continuing to work from home if you can and avoiding public transport. If you must use public transport, avoid peak hours, wear a face covering and wash your hands before and after travel. For everyone's safety, we regularly clean our services with antiviral disinfectant and will be providing hand sanitizer across our network. For more information, search TfL's Restart Plan. To the Mayor of London and TfL, every journey matters.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
Are you ready for the realest first-hand take of what's happening in the NBA? On their podcast, All the Smoke, former NBA players Matt Barnes and Steven Jackson bring their fiery intensity to the mic, dishing on the latest news and drama from on and off the court without boundaries.
Half man, half amazing. My friend, our brother, Vince Carter, man, welcome to the show.
Yo, what's up, man? What's up, my brother? Man,
Search All the Smoke on TuneIn to listen. Let's be honest, we all spend too much of our day on social media. But at least you can spend your endless scroll time to discover new things on TuneIn. Follow @TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to always be in the know about the best new stuff streaming in the app. From breaking news stories and live sporting events.
Yeah, but it's unique times. I think there's unique circumstances, and we're trying to
standout stations and podcasts. Stay in touch with TuneIn.
It's TuneIn Sports on this day. On this day in 1980, the New York Mets draft Darryl Strawberry at age 18.
Here's Darryl warming up their third pitcher. Well hit to left center field. Out of here, Darryl Strawberry's first major league home run. Strawberry goes to the opposite power alley with great authority. It's a 2-run home run.
To listen to conversations breaking down the moments just like this, search sports to be part of the discussion on TuneIn.
This is Mike Golick Jr. from ESPN's Golick and Wingo. Every morning, Wingo, Dad, and I sit down and discuss all the news, drama, and highlights spinning the sports world that day. And with TuneIn, you can hear us whenever and wherever you go. Just search Golick and Wingo to start listening today.
Ready for some straight talk on what's happening in the MLB? On the Barstool Sports Podcast Starting 9, Dallas Braden and Jared Carabas cut through the BS to break down the league the way they really see it.
Yeah, we're continuing our little mini-series of college baseball coaches in addition to bringing you major league players from throughout the league. If you've been listening to Starting 9 for some time now, you know that we've had a big leaguer on every single episode for probably 2 years now.
Search Starting 9 on TuneIn to listen.
Want to relive the glory of college football?
Balls over a man, into the end zone,
Come explore TuneIn's classic game replay collection to hear ESPN's complete coverage of the 2019 New Year's 6 bowl games. Don't miss your chance to re-experience the Rose Bowl, the 2020 National Championship, featuring Clemson and LSU.
There's going to be 2 champions on the field tomorrow night. There's going to be 1 team hold up the trophy.
Rise to the 5! Touchdown! Search classic game replays to listen for free.
Did you know that with TuneIn's local radio feature, you can stream live FM and AM stations broadcasting in your area? Discover local news, talk, and music stations. Navigate to the local radio section under Browse to listen locally on TuneIn.
And breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's risk on as investors cling to optimism for a quick economic recovery. The S&P's headed for its 4th straight gain. The Nasdaq's within 1% of its all-time high. The dollar's down to its weakest since early March, while gold and treasuries also slump. When you look at the numbers every 15 minutes. S&P's up 1%, up 30. Dow's up 1.3%, up 332. The Nasdaq is up 0.5%, up 52. The 10-year is down 22 seconds. The yield is 0.75%. West Texas Intermediate crude oil is now down 0.7% at $36.55 a barrel, with COMEX gold down 2.1% at $16.9720 an ounce. The dollar yen 108.76. The euro's $1.2222. The British pound $1.2575. American Express fears the U.S. could see another increase in unemployment next year as large companies' vows to avoid job cuts in 2020 begin to expire. That is something you don't want to look forward to. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. I'm Greg Jarrett.
You're listening to Bloomberg Markets with Lisa Abramowitz and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
You know, Lisa, I'm looking at my screen right here. I've got the 2-year Treasury yield at 0.19%. It's up about 3 basis points today, but we're really talking about, zero interest rates effectively on the short end of the curve here to get a sense of kind of what that means near term and long term for the markets. We're really fortunate to have Chris Alman. Chris is the Chief Investment Officer for the California State Teachers Retirement System. That's a big one. $239 billion under management based in Sacramento. They take care of all the teachers' retirements, so they are all over the market. Chris, thanks so much for joining us here. What is your thought of kind of when you look at the yield curve here and you see the short end of the curve darn near 0%? What does that mean to you?
Well, Paul, good to talk to you. And first, let me say on behalf of all the regular listeners, of which I am a part, I am sad to see the Paul and Lisa team separated. But
exactly. We are too.
We're back to where we were in 2010 and 11, where it's zero interest rates. And I don't think it's for a short term. I think this is for a long term because we're going to have a very bumpy recovery. With the Fed actually talking about manipulating the curve is just shocking language to me. But it shows, remember back with QE 1, 2, and 3, we said the Fed was out of tools. And each of those quantitative easings was less effective. I think the Fed has used all their ammo at this point, and they're really not able to do much. So for investors, again, unfortunately, it's going to be another couple of years, I think, where you're not going to get much return out of fixed income at all, but you are going to see opportunities because the Fed is pumping money into the system and saying risk on. Now, that said, I don't expect corporate earnings to improve very much at all. We've got some serious damage to this market.
Chris, this is the conundrum, and you have a front row seat to this conundrum on both sides because you oversee the second biggest U.S. public pension with $240 billion of assets under management, and you have to earn income in order to meet your obligations at a time when interest rates are this low, when corporate bond yields are near record lows because of what the Federal Reserve has done, and with a not that great outlook economically for some of these companies. Do you feel like you're being pushed to take risks that you're not comfortable with, given the valuations?
We were faced with that challenge, Lisa, back in 2009, and we made the very strong decision not to take additional risk. And I would encourage people not to try and do that again. Now, for institutional investors, we've got other investment opportunities. We've got real estate. Surprising during this crisis, leases have been strong. Our real estate team has said that our buildings, the rent payments are being made. So we're very comfortable, and those are good income returns. Infrastructure, even though it's been slow, that's a great place to earn a cash flow return. But I think when you look at endowments and a lot of the pension plans, we're very low in our allocation, our percentage allocation to fixed income. If you're in a 401k, you're in tough luck because you don't have a lot of options. You really, the traditional 60-40 stock bond portfolio at 40% is going to be pretty darn close to a 0, maybe a 3% return, which isn't going to perform. And 401k investors don't have a lot of other options, so they will probably have to pile on risk. And that may be part of the reason we're seeing money flowing into this equity market at this ridiculous level.
Chris, you say real estate. Very interesting at a time when people are talking about offices becoming somewhat obsolete with the work from home movement, when people are wondering what the future of large cities will be. How do you think about real estate investments as an opportunity right now? Where?
Well, it is not a great opportunity to come in and buy because things have not repriced much. Where equity, back in March, equity was down 20%. Now we're almost back to flat. Real estate is going to look across that valley in recovery and basically say, well, our buildings should be priced about where they were. You're seeing that in retail at the single-family home level, and we're just not seeing a lot of transactions at the office. In the office market, you're right. It will cause people to rethink how you structure and how densely you pack an office. But I think that real estate is still going to be strong. Retail has definitely been harmed. The big malls, which are owned by a concentrated few companies, the big malls will come back, but they are very damaged by this 4-month, 5-month gap of activity, and it may be longer. But I think industrial, office, apartment continues to be very strong areas in that market. Again, I wouldn't go rushing out to buy because prices aren't cheap. But if you own and you can build to own, then you're going to get a steady lease income that's a nice return on your portfolio. And we have seen that through this cycle.
Hey, Chris, we've had some good fiscal stimulus coming out of Washington, fairly bipartisan here. And I guess the next one that people are looking at, or the market's looking at, is this maybe a $3 trillion plan put out by the House. A lot of that, or some of that, is going to include fiscal stimulus for states and local municipalities. How important is it for these states to get some support here?
Well, Paul, I'd very seldom correct you, but you said a fair amount of stimulus. I'd say a ridiculous amount of stimulus. I mean, it is 2 times what was done in 2008. Basically, the government has socialized losses and is bailing out the stock market and bailing out corporations, trying to help individuals. I mean, you've heard the stories, anecdotal stories over and over about people who now have a bigger paycheck by staying at home than they do by working. The idea that we have to give a bonus for somebody to go back to work to get off basically welfare is a shocking position. But the question about the states and the cities and the counties, they do need help. Now, it all depends on where they get their revenue from. Now, I'm going to pick a state like Florida or even New York City, where you get a lot of income from hotel occupancy tax. So you need visitors. That's been 0 for 4 months, and it may be very low for, I think, until the end of the year. So they're going to be hurting. Now, if you're a state that survives on property taxes, you're going to be in good shape. Income taxes obviously will have taken a hit and are going to see a decline. Our state in California does survive on income tax as well as sales tax, which is lower. But all this stimulus, people have been saving. The average person has been saving a lot of that stimulus money. So I think you will see a rebound in retail sales when you can get out and move around. But if you're a state or a city or a county that's been trying to survive on that hotel occupancy tax, retail sales from car sales, you've got a gap in your budget that yes, you need help filling. And now with an added stress of the police, fire, safety, overtime due to the riots, it's stretched their budgets paper thin.
Chris Alman, thank you so much. Unfortunately, we'll have to have you back again. We love speaking with you. Chris Alman, Chief Investment Officer at California State Teachers Retirement System with $240 billion of assets under management, who is before his time riding his bicycle. This is Bloomberg Markets.
At the start of every day.
Want to relive the glory of college football?
Balls over a man, into the end zone.
Come explore TuneIn's classic game replay collection to hear ESPN's complete coverage of the 2019 New Year's 6 bowl games. Don't miss your chance to re-experience the Rose Bowl, the 2020 National Championship, featuring Clemson and LSU.
There's going to be 2 champions on the field tomorrow night. There's going to be 1 team hold up the trophy.
10, pass to the 5, touchdown! Search classic game replays to listen for free.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
Where do sports, culture, and basketball nostalgia collide? On their podcast, Knuckleheads, NBA veterans Quentin Richardson and Darius Miles sit down with athletes, musicians, and entertainers to get brutally honest, totally unguarded conversations about everything from current events to untold stories from the golden era of sports.
Kill O'Neal. You know that, right? I tried to tip dunk all the free throw line one time.
Search Knuckleheads on TuneIn to listen.
Hi, this is Mike Tirico, introducing you to Sports Uncovered, the newest podcast series from the storytellers at NBC Sports that will shine a fresh light on the most unforgettable moments in sport.
The reason why I'm smiling, I might get in trouble for this.
Search Sports Uncovered to start listening today.
With the NHL season temporarily on ice, now is a good time to catch up on past games. With Game Replay on TuneIn, you can hear every matchup of the 2019-2020 season so far. And for a limited time, it's free for hockey fans everywhere. Search Classic Game Replays to start listening. Ready for a one-of-a-kind look at the NFL? On the PFF NFL podcast, Steve Palazzolo and Sam Munson interpret the unique stats of Pro Football Focus to analyze the league, uncover secret superstars, and discuss which teams to watch out for in the next Super Bowl.
Let's talk some football. Let's do it, Steve. All sorts of stuff. We're going to do most improved defenses around the NFL. Solomon Wilcots, our very own. He went into some detail over at PFF.com. Most improved defenses around the NFL.
Search PFF NFL on TuneIn to listen.
Ready to talk brass tacks on what's happening in Major League Baseball? Turn to the Effectively Wild podcast from Fangraphs for daily statistics, analysis, and commentary.
One team will say, yeah, we're going to keep paying minor leaguers their stipend, and another team will say, we're going to extend the stipend through this month, and then another team will say, nope, we're cutting them off. So are extending it at least through August, which would basically be the end of the minor league regular season.
Search Effectively Wild on TuneIn to listen.
4 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Radio. This is Bloomberg Markets with Lisa Abramowitz and Paul Sweeney.
How do you kind of view the volatility in the marketplace here?
What are you looking at to give you some sort of compass through this period?
Companies across the board, across industries, really trying to shore up their balance sheets.
A lot of economists are just throwing up their hands and saying, we don't know.
Breaking market news and insight from Bloomberg experts.
There's only so much that you can speed up vaccine development. Because of all the dislocations, there's always relative value trades that you could be doing.
This could be a U-shaped recession rather than a V-shaped recession.
It's the uncertainty, I think, that is really spooking everyone.
This is Bloomberg Markets with Lisa Abramowitz and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
The initial public offering window is open once again. Notable deals including Warner Music and ZoomInfo will take a look at the IPO market. Plus, Upwork chief economist Adam Ozimek discusses the recent report outlining the economic implications of the global shift to remote work. But first, let's go to Greg Jarrett of Bloomberg News for a Bloomberg Business Flash. Greg.
Stocks push ever higher, Paul, as the market's rally carries into yet another day. The S&P added to gains made in earlier days on optimism that lifting lockdowns around the world will allow the economy to climb out of its current hole. Now, we check those numbers every 15 minutes throughout the trading day. S&P 500 is up 1%, up 30. The Dow's up 1.25%, up 323. The Nasdaq's up 0.6%, up 55. The 10-year is down, let's see here, 23.30 seconds with a yield of 0.76%. West Texas Intermediate crude oil is down 0.2% at 36.74 a barrel, while COMEX gold's down 2.1% at 16.9750 an ounce. The dollar yen 108.82. The euro's at $1.1220, and the British pound $1.25.95. The Bank of Canada has softened its worst-case scenario, saying the negative impact of COVID-19 on the economy appears to have peaked. In a decision today where it left its benchmark rate unchanged at about 0.25%. As widely expected, policymakers said they'll scale back some market operations while adjusting their forecasts for second quarter gross domestic product to a less severe contraction. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Bloomberg Markets continues now with Lisa Abramowitz and Paul Sweeney.
Greg Jarrett, thank you so much. I love this segment, the Small Caps Report. Today is no different. In fact, we do see the small caps continuing to gain more than the larger caps in this continuation of the trend, Dave, that we were talking about earlier, a rotation into some of the less loved stocks during the market recovery that we have seen. What's the latest in the small caps sector?
Well, as far as that goes, Lisa, you've got the Russell 2000 index up 2.4% at the moment, and the S&P 500 is only higher by 1.1%. You know, that said, smaller companies have a long way to catch up. For the year, the Russell's down 13%, and the S&P 500 is only off 3.6%. So, you know, one day does not a reversal make, but it's certainly a change from the trend we've seen this year. And the Russell's biggest gain belongs to Digital Turbine, whose ticker is APPS, APPS. The mobile phone software maker has advanced almost 24.5%. Fiscal first quarter forecast beat analyst average estimates in a Bloomberg survey. Cheesecake Factory, ticker CAKE, has climbed 17%. The restaurant chain said dining rooms are open at about 25% of its locations, and it's aiming for 65% by mid-June. American Eagle Outfitters, ticker AEO, has risen 15.5%. CEO Jay Schottenstein said stores reopened by the teen apparel retailer are doing better than it expected. Now, the Russell's steepest drop belongs to RTW Retail Wins, ticker RTW. The women's apparel seller has fallen almost 39% to less than 25 cents a share after disclosing it may file for bankruptcy. And Evofem Biosciences, ticker EVFM, has lost 25%. The developer of a non-hormonal birth control gel raised $100 million in a share sale, amounting to a 36% stake.
Bloomberg Stocks editor Dave Wilson, thank you so much for that report. We appreciate it. Well, amid all the turmoil of the markets, we have actually seen the IPO window open ever so slightly over the past week or so as the markets rebound off their lows. To get a sense of what's going on, we welcome Crystal C. She's an IPO reporter for Bloomberg News. Crystal, thanks so much for joining us. I'm looking at, names that, a name I'm familiar with, Warner Music. I used to cover that name back in the day. They, after being private for a while, they came public. NetEase, ZoomInfo. Give us a sense of kind of what's going on in the IPO market these days.
The IPO market is coming back in full swing after, several weeks of a rather muted, market reception. But like you said, Warner Music, we all know them. They are listing today. They raised, the shareholder raised $1.9 million. It's a pretty sizable IPO. In fact, it's the biggest U.S. IPO this year. We continue to see more just globally on the heels of Pete's in London. This week we saw Warner Music. We'll see NetEase in Hong Kong. So altogether this week we're expecting a volume of more than $6.4 billion of IPO fundraising. So it's a pretty good week. It's the best week since since, January. So I think it's probably fair to say that this week we've seen that it's recovered to pre-COVID level, but whether this carries on is a different question.
Crystal, so far this year, the debt markets have been wide open with investment-grade companies selling more than $1 trillion of debt in the period in the least amount of time ever. I'm wondering why companies are now shifting over to the equity market to raise capital when the debt markets have been so open. Is there some sort of wave or trend behind this?
So the companies that we're seeing this week and actually the past few weeks has been the ones that have been on file since the beginning of the year. So they've been planning to go public all year long, but the plans were held up because of COVID. Most of these companies have had the chance to meet investors or even do some sort of private fundraising before the actual IPO event. But now that the market is back in full swing, they can come back up. That said, it doesn't mean that they're not tapping into that market as well. But some of these companies are, like ZoomInfo, for instance, they're probably cash flow positive. They don't need the money that much, so they don't need to, go to that market desperately. That's why. But then it's something that they haven't planned all along. So I think going ahead with it makes sense when the window opens up.
So, Crystal, historically, when you do an IPO roadshow, you have the rubber chicken lunches at the Four Seasons in New York and London and Hong Kong and, San Francisco. How are companies marketing their deals here in the time of COVID and social distancing?
Let's just say that nobody's getting any fancy lunches these days.
Okay.
These roadshows have been shortened significantly from what used to be 7-10 days. Now they're doing it in 4 or 5 days. Sometimes in a SPAC situation, they can do a deal within a day, and that would be a $900 million raise. So a lot of these are done via Zoom, Zoom video, not ZoomInfo, the one that's listing this week. And on top of that, they have actually met investors face-to-face before COVID. So they have a good understanding. Investors know what they're doing. They know the financial. They got the chance to speak to the CEO. They got the chance to speak to analysts. So yeah, it's not entirely without human touch, but most of it is done online and, via telephone.
Paul, why is it called a rubber chicken lunch? Why is that the cliche for all roadshow lunches?
Well, usually, and it's not a comment on the Four Seasons, but generally it's just if you got to serve 500 people,
come on,
you just get a slab of chicken, throw it on a plate, and the investors are happy.
Well, Crystal, does that bear out with your experience? I'm just asking also because Tom Keene this morning, and anytime he talks about roadshows, he always talks about the rubber chicken. I know it's a Wall Street cliche, but aren't people relieved not to have rubber chicken? Are they happier having Zoom calls?
I you know what? I personally think the lunches weren't that bad. I've had it personally. I would much rather have those rubber chickens than just stay at home looking at the screen all day. But it does give company more flexibility. You meet more investors, and there's no regional constraint. There's no much time constraint. You don't need to get on a plane. So in a way, it becomes more effective and it becomes more efficient.
Crystal T, the lunches aren't that bad. Crystal T, IPO reporter for Bloomberg News, talking about the rush of IPOs actually becoming more like the pre-pandemic volume. But notably, these are the IPOs that were set up to go ahead of the pandemic that already had done the roadshows. So these aren't full Zoom roadshows necessarily, Paul.
No, it'll be interesting to see how the calendar kind of plays out here and what might be kind of a new normalcy kind of taking hold here in the marketplace for the remainder of the year.
Yeah, I wonder about the work from home movement and how much interpersonal relations and sort of the face-to-face meetings, how much value people will find they bring after this period and after the relationships have been exhausted in what you can do over the screen. Right now, we're going to head down to our 99.1 studios virtually. We've got Nathan Hager there with world and national headlines. Nathan.
Now, that doesn't change. Thank you, Lisa. President Trump is facing a mounting backlash for the tough federal crackdown on protests outside the White House Monday night before that photo op at a damaged church nearby. In a radio interview with Fox News, the president says he didn't order the protesters to be cleared out. He also says Park Police didn't use tear gas, though reporters at the scene say otherwise. Defense Secretary Mark Esper says he didn't give the order either. He says they thought they were leaving the White House complex to inspect the damage.
What I was not aware of was exactly where we were going when we arrived at the church,
and what the plans were once we got there.
In that Fox News interview, the president also called it a false report that he was taken to a secure bunker at the White House for his safety on Friday night. In the president's words, it was much more for an inspection. Senate Judiciary Chairman Lindsey Graham is moving ahead with a hearing into alleged FBI bias in the 2016 Russia investigation.
We're going to be talking about how it got off the rails, who's responsible for it getting off the rails, and making sure that they're punished appropriately.
Former Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein is testifying defending the Mueller probe. He says every FISA warrant he approved appeared justified at the time. He says whenever agents or prosecutors make mistakes, there needs to be remedial action. With unrest gripping much of the country, Joe Biden is widening his national lead over President Trump. The latest Monmouth survey puts the former vice president 11 points ahead, 52 to 41%. House Majority Whip Jim Clyburn says Biden should take his time picking a running mate, even as other Democrats pressure the former vice president to move quickly. South Carolina Democrats spoke at a Washington Post Live event. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries.
What began in China has expanded worldwide.
Is it China that's going to lead that consumer recovery?
What have we learned?
I'm curious as to what you're monitoring most closely in the news flow.
What can we predict?
Are you seeing a time when you can expect recovery in global travel?
Bloomberg Daybreak Asia.
If people realize that those numbers are going to get a lot worse.
Tonight at 6 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
Hi, I'm your host, Smokey Colbert, filling in for Smokey, because after 75 years of...
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Turns out there's much more to say. Nearly 90% of wildfires are caused by us humans being careless, dumping our used barbecue coals willy-nilly. Guess the song was wrong. We did start the fire. That's why I respect Mother Nature and her trees, whether coniferous or new car scent. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service, your state forester, and the Ad Council.
With COVID-19, so much is unknown.
Is this the worst you've seen?
But we are committed to getting you every piece of information we can as soon as we can.
Tell us about this first big win you have. What is it, 24 million N95 masks?
Fewer unknowns.
Who's winning here? Where is the pressure right now?
That's our goal.
What worries you the most? The time it's going to take for a vaccine?
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
Melissa from Michigan. I work an extra part-time job serving lunch at my child's school, but I still can't afford to put food on our table.
Daniel from California. Choosing whether to pay the rent or pay to fix the car to get to work doesn't leave us with much at all. Now we can't even pay for meals.
Hunger is a story we can end. End it at feedingamerica.org. Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
For the friendships, for the fresh air, for the space to grow, for the knowledge, for the sport, for the outdoor education, for the wide horizons, for the academic excellence, for the future. Unleash your child's education at West Buckland School, a co-educational day and boarding school in beautiful North Devon. If you're moving to the southwest for a better quality of life, this is education without compromise, in what the Good Schools Guide called a gem of a school in an exceptional location. To see for yourself, find us at westbuckland.com.
You know that feeling when you get more than you expected? Like discovering that the box of chocolates has a whole other layer underneath, or scoring extra poppadoms with your takeaway, or joining Tesco Mobile and finding out you get the latest phones and 99% UK network coverage. Yeah, that moment feels good, right? Tesco Mobile. Every little helps.
99% 4G population coverage indoors and outdoors across UK.
People's Postcode Lottery's 30k a day is back. £30,000 will be won every single day by players in the July draws. That's £30,000 for every player in the winning postcode. Visit postcodelottery.co.uk/radio before midnight on the 18th of June to play in the July draws. PPL managed lotteries on behalf of good causes. 16 plus conditions apply. Play responsibly.
Let's be honest, We all spend too much of our day on social media. But at least you can spend your endless scroll time to discover new things on TuneIn. Follow @TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to always be in the know about the best new stuff streaming in the app. From breaking news stories and live sporting events.
He does! Fabry wins it!
To standout stations and podcasts. Stay in touch with TuneIn.
With the NHL season temporarily on ice, now is a good time to catch up on past games. With Game Replay on TuneIn, you can hear every matchup of the 2019-2020 season so far. And for a limited time, it's free for hockey fans everywhere. Search Classic Game Replays to start listening.
With millions of podcasts dropping new episodes all the time, how do you keep up with all your favorites? TuneIn makes it easy. Simply head to the home screen and find your new episode section to see the latest additions.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
Are you fully informed on the NBA? On the NBA Hangtime podcast, veteran sports writers Sekou Smith and John Schumann analyze the latest NBA news, storylines, and discussions with guests from around the basketball universe.
Isaiah Thomas joined us here on the Hangtime podcast. Isaiah, good morning.
Everybody's doing well. As you know, my daughter tested positive.
Search NBA Hangtime on TuneIn to listen.
Okay, here we go.
With the NFL draft in the books and the schedule set, check out a TuneIn podcast for daily updates on the lead up to the 2020 season. Like the Ringer NFL show, where a rotating cast of Ringer experts talk with players, coaches, and special guests about the NFL landscape.
A lot of the other teams that we consider...
Or ESPN's NFL Live.
If there are some delays because of the COVID-19...
Search sports on TuneIn to explore these pods and much more.
News 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Stocks continue to extend the global rally as investors cling to optimism there'll be a quick economic recovery from the pandemic. We look at the growing numbers every 15 minutes throughout the trading day. S&P 500 is now up 1.25%, up 38. Dow's up 1.6%, up 423. The Nasdaq's up 0.7%, up 70. The 10-year is down 25-30 seconds. The yield is 0.76%. West Texas Intermediate crude oil is now up 0.7% at $37.10 per barrel. COMEX gold is down 2.1% at $16.97 even per barrel. The dollar yen is at 108. COMEX gold is priced per ounce. That's $16.97 per ounce. The dollar yen 108.90. The euro $1.12.31. The British pound $1.25.99. Close to 6 million jobs are potentially on the line, according to Bloomberg Economics. That includes higher-paid supervisors in sectors where frontline workers were hit first, such as restaurants and hotels. It also includes the knock-on effects to connected industries like professional services, finance, and real estate. That's the Bloomberg Business Flash. I'm Greg Jarrett.
You're listening to Bloomberg Markets with Lisa Abramowitz and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
A number of the largest companies out there have said that this work-from-home experiment that has been foisted upon many, many people is likely to herald in a new era with more people staying home. What is, though, the future of working from home? Does it look different from what we have come to experience for those of us lucky enough to be able to work from home over the past couple of months? Joining us now is Adam Ozimic. He's chief economist at Upwork, based in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Adam, thank you so much for being with us. Your firm specializes in remote work. We've seen some of the pitfalls of work from home experience. What can we glean from the period that we've just lived through?
Thanks for having me. And there's certainly remote work comes with challenges for some people, but I think it's also important to focus on what the benefits are. So our survey showed that remote work was going better than expected for 56% of hiring managers. And it was only going worse than expected for 1 out of 10. So when we talk about the pluses and minuses, overall, companies are being surprised on the upside as they try this way of working.
Adam, what's the sense of productivity here? You know, a lot of folks will say, gee, I'm more productive when I'm in the office. But again, a lot of folks will say, boy, without all the meetings and, distractions, I'm more productive at home. Kind of what are you finding?
So 2 of the 3 biggest benefits to working from home that we're finding are fewer unnecessary meetings and reduced distractions at the office. So those are important things, and people are finding that's made working at home more productive. So 32% of hiring managers thought working from home was more productive.
Adam, I got to be honest. Yes, perhaps it was distracting when someone came by my desk and started to chat, but sometimes it can be a little more distracting when one of my children demands some lunch or breakfast or to be cuddled with or whatever else. How much of a disparity does the work from home experiment raise for people with children or with childcare full-time at home versus those who don't have that?
So it's definitely true that right now working from home comes with some unique challenges. So 32% of respondents thought that there were increased distractions at home. So that's definitely something that's real. But when we're talking about what's going to happen to remote work in the medium term or the long run, that's not always going to be the case. We're living through a very challenging time right now where kids are home instead of being at school, daycare centers are closed. But when things go back to normal, those distractions are going to decline. So the really positive numbers that we're seeing, I think that they would get even more positive over time.
So, Adam, here at Bloomberg LP, one of the key aspects of our office designs around the world is that we have common areas, where you can get coffee and snacks and things like that. And that's an area where, again, around the world in all the Bloomberg offices, people can congregate. And I find that I talk to people I wouldn't necessarily talk to. I get ideas I wouldn't necessarily get, and that it's a real positive to kind of interact with people. Is that kind of a downside that you've noted in some of your work?
So economists definitely talk about the phenomenon you're describing here. There's something in the air, right? It's working in close quarters with people
COVID-19
similar problems, who are there's that something good in the air, right? And it's a source of productivity that you're working around people who are working on kind of similar, maybe adjacent problems, thinking about adjacent things, and you have sort of chance encounters and socialize among them. And I think that I don't want to dismiss that entirely, but I think that today that social media helps replace some of that. So there are, for example, a ton of economists on Twitter, and Twitter's kind of like the office cooler for economists. And there's a lot of great ideas floating around there. It's somewhere to sort of chat casually with people working on similar problems. So I think that there are ways that we're, learning to sort of replace the office cooler online.
There is also the technological challenge of how exhausting it is to be on Zoom calls or to be on calls where there's a half-second delay that totally throws off the cadence of an interaction. And no, this sounds petty or small, but studies have shown that it increases the level of exhaustion as you have to focus that much more. And the distraction of seeing your own face. I mean, have you done anything on that front, the interface, and whether it's really as effective as it could be?
Well, I think part of it is that, technology just needs to get better over time. And also people need to get used to working with technology. So, part of the distraction on Zoom calls can be lags. Part of the distraction is people who haven't unmuted their microphones or can't figure out how to share their screen. And those kinds of technological issues I expect will go down over time. I mean, you really have thrown people into remote work overnight, and they're trying to learn how to use this technology very rapidly, and they haven't had a chance to figure out what works best for them. And I think that some of this is going to get better as people get used to it.
Adam Ozimek, thank you so much for joining. Adam is a chief economist at Upwork. That's a publicly traded company on NASDAQ. UPWK is the ticker. They are based in Lancaster, PA, talking about remote work here. Lisa, and I think, I think it's probably inescapable that, some percentage of jobs are going to remain work from home here as we get to the other side of this.
Yeah, but there are consequences to that as well, right? I mean, Facebook basically saying you can work from wherever you want. You can go live somewhere cheaper. The caveat being that you will be paid less in relation to how much lower salaries tend to be in the region of your choice. So there is this question of how much this will be used as an excuse to reduce compensation. That said, there clearly is a shift underway that has been accelerated by this latest experiment.
Exactly. I think just, I kind of find the value of coming into the office. Again, the Bloomberg offices are so vibrant, full of energy, and it's such a positive work environment that, I think a lot of folks will look forward to coming back into the offices. But for some, I think, they're going to find the advantages of working from home are going to outweigh the disadvantages. And if it's offered on a post-pandemic world, they will take their companies up on it. This is Bloomberg.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. Stocks are powering higher with the Dow up almost 400 points. Investors clinging to optimism for a quick economic recovery from the pandemic, despite violent protests across the nation. Service providers started to emerge in May from a pandemic-induced tailspin as nationwide lockdowns began to lift. While the monthly increase for the Institute for Supply Management's index was the largest in 2 years, it's still below that mark that shows most service-related industries continue to contract. The Trump administration has warned that it will suspend passenger flights from China if Beijing doesn't allow American carriers to re-enter the market. The coronavirus pandemic prompted flight cuts earlier this year. And American Express fears the U.S. could see another increase in unemployment next year. The firm has pulled back on adding new credit card customers because it can't get a clear picture of employment trends. Courtney Donahoe, Bloomberg Radio.
My mother was always very active and independent, and she was familiar with her neighborhood. But one day, she stopped at the stop sign for much longer than usual. She wasn't even really sure where she was at.
It's important for you to talk to someone about it. I felt so much better after my son told me, Mom, we'll figure it out.
When something feels different, it could be Alzheimer's. Now is the time to talk. Visit alz.org/ourstories to learn more. A message from the Alzheimer's Association and the Ad Council.
In-depth analysis, concise reporting, need-to-know global business news. Around the world and across the markets, Bloomberg connects the dots for decision makers. Stay on top of today's headlines. Follow big breakthroughs in tech. Understand the latest political issues. See how the world's wealthiest are spending their money. Track what's happening in the markets, and much more. Subscribe today to Bloomberg, the global standard for business reporting. Get it all at Bloomberg.com/subscriptions. Market upheavals.
The narrative is driven
for the friendships, for the fresh air, for the space to grow, for the knowledge, for the sport, for the outdoor education, for the wide horizons, for the academic excellence, for the future. Unleash your child's education at West Buckland School, a co-educational day and boarding school in beautiful North Devon. If you're moving to the southwest for a better quality of life, this is education without compromise in what the Good Schools Guide called a gem of a school in an exceptional location. To see for yourself, find us at westbuckland.com.
If you have to drive, then it's more important than ever to watch your speed. As London starts to reopen, there are going to be more people on our streets. There'll be more people cycling, more people walking to work or to the shops. If you must drive, avoid the morning and evening peaks when the roads will be busier. We want the streets to be safe for everyone, all the time. So watch your speed. To the Mayor of London and TfL, every journey matters.
You know that feeling when you get more than you expected? Like discovering that the box of chocolates has a whole other layer underneath? Or scoring extra poppadoms with your takeaway? Or joining Tesco Mobile and finding out you get the latest phones and 99% UK network coverage? Yeah, that moment feels good, right? Tesco Mobile. Every little helps.
99% 4G population coverage indoors and outdoors across UK.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
It's TuneIn Sports on this day. On this day in 1980, the New York Mets draft Darryl Strawberry at age 18.
Here's Darryl warming up their third pitcher. Well hit to left center field. Out of here, Darryl Strawberry's first Major League home run. Strawberry goes to the opposite power alley with great authority. It's a 2-run home run.
To listen to conversations breaking down the moments just like this, search sports to be part of the discussion on TuneIn.
This is Mike Golick from ESPN's Golick and Wingo. Every morning, Trey Wingo, my son, and I sit down to discuss all the news, drama, and highlights spinning the sports world that day. And with TuneIn, you can hear us whenever and wherever you go. Just search Golick and Wingo to start listening today.
Ready to talk brass tacks on what's happening in Major League Baseball? Turn to the Effectively Wild podcast from Fangraphs for daily statistics, analysis, and commentary.
One team will say, yeah, we're going to keep paying minor leaguers their stipend, and another team will say, we're going to extend the stipend through this month, and then another team will say, nope, we're cutting them off. So are extending it at least through August, which would basically be the end of the minor league regular season.
Search Effectively Wild on TuneIn to listen.
With the NHL season temporarily on ice, now is a good time to catch up on past games.
This shot score, Malkin again! Bergeron, he scores!
With game replay on TuneIn, you can listen to every power play, slap shot, and goal of the 2019-2020 season so far.
Suter to Cunnin to Fiala, he scores!
And for a limited time, it's free for hockey fans everywhere. Search Classic Game Replays to start listening.
Broadcasting live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 106.1 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Markets.
Coming up, we're going to be talking about how Facebook's CEO, Mark Zuckerberg, is facing a bunch of opposition among his own staff members as to the platform's approach to censoring or limiting some of the items that can be posted. Plus, we're going to take a look at the implications of debt relief stalling for poor nations. Right now, though, let's head over to Greg Jarrett for a Bloomberg Business Flash. Greg.
Thank you, Lisa. Airline stocks are up. This comes after the Trump administration issued an order suspending passenger flights from China-based airlines, and as stocks broadly climb amid optimism about a quick economic recovery from the pandemic. We take a look at the numbers every 15 minutes throughout the trading day. The S&P 500 is up 1.1%, up 35. Dow's up 1.6%, up 409. And the Nasdaq's up 0.6%, up 57. The 10-year right now is down 22.30 seconds with a yield of 0.75%. West Texas Intermediate crude is up 1% at 37.18 a barrel. COMEX gold is down 1.9% at $1,770 per ounce. The dollar yen, 108.98. The euro's at $1.1229, and the British pound, $1.2601. Applications for loans to purchase homes are surging. The latest sign the demand for houses has held up during the pandemic. Mortgage Bankers Association Purchasing Index is up 5.3% for the week ended May 29th to hit the highest level since late January. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. I'm Greg Jarrett.
Bloomberg Opinion, informed perspectives, and expert data-driven commentary on breaking news.
Well, the big social media companies, most notably Facebook and Twitter, are grappling with the concept of free speech and what they should do to manage or regulate the speech that is on their platforms. Are they media companies with all the obligations associated with being a media company, or are they simply technology platforms for third-party content? Tim O'Brien, senior columnist for Bloomberg Opinion, joins us to kind of talk about this issue. Tim, so give us a sense about Facebook. Mark Zuckerberg is getting a lot of criticism by saying, hey, it's not our job to police free speech. What's the status?
Well, it has come to the fore right now, Paul, because we have protests in the street over the George Floyd killing. We're still in the grips of a pandemic. People are hurting. And recently, President Trump took to Twitter to essentially say if the protests continued, he was prepared to unleash the military on the streets of the United States. And he had been on Twitter prior to that, making false claims about voter fraud. Twitter was prompted by those posts to put warning labels and fact checks on them. Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook demurred, and Zuckerberg's view on this is a classic and well-regarded free speech position, which is let 1,000 flowers bloom. We have to have everyone have their voice. The problem with that perspective, because there is an exception to an absolutist approach to free speech, is you can't go into a theater and scream fire if it's crowded, because you will endanger people doing so. And in that circumstance, their safety outweighs your free speech. This whole debate has come home to roost this week at Facebook in a very deep way. At the end of last week and this week, employees there are staging virtual walkouts. Zuckerberg has met with outside civil rights groups to talk through it, and he's holding on to the position he's maintained.
Can you talk about the difference between Facebook's approach and Twitter's approach and the rationale for each?
Well, I think a little of it is they're also in the good company of Silicon Valley magical thinkers, I think, who have always believed that the machines they've built are forces for good in an absolute way. And of course, they've been great sources for innovation, job creation, growth in the economy. But they're not friction-free. There's obviously downsides that we're well aware of around platforms, specifically information-based platforms, getting gamed. And I think really the 2016 election was the first reckoning in this new era for them. And I think the owners of the platforms, the managers of the platforms have been wrestling with how do you police information in a way that the platform isn't being abused and it isn't endangering others. Twitter, over the last week, has decided to take a more aggressive stance and say we will mark tweets that we think are false or abusive. Facebook is deciding not to, but it'll be interesting to see how long Facebook can hold on to that position. And I don't think it's just because they're free speech advocates. I think it's because they don't want to get regulated as a news platform.
That's kind of where I wanted to go, Tim. Give us a sense, President Trump was talking about maybe regulating somehow some of these social media platforms. Kind of where are we in terms of that regulatory oversight for some of these big platforms?
Well, it's still up in the air. There's a lot of lobbying and jousting going on around this in Washington. The irony of President Trump saying that he might try to change FCC regulations so these platforms have to police themselves more adequately would probably result in people like President Trump not being able to write anything, because he's one of the most serial abusers of both the fact pattern and people's goodwill on social media platforms. I think there's no question that particularly Twitter and Facebook, that a lot of news crosses those sites. They've put a lot of newspapers out of business because people have turned to them as alternatives as news sources. And I think newspapers and radio stations and television stations have historically been held to a higher standard about how they vet what gets published on their pages. And I think that's coming to the social media platforms too.
Tim, this is something we could be talking about for hours. Just to wrap things together and quickly here, I'm wondering, this has been a pattern at Facebook. Even some of their internal analysts have said that they foment division in the way that they operate, and yet they have chosen not to do anything about it. Do you think this is the tipping point that will force Mark Zuckerberg's hand?
I do think it's the tipping point, Lisa, because it's not simply that they won't do anything about division and polarization that occurs on Facebook, but part of its business model actually thrives on people's attraction to going into forums like this and getting into pugnacious confrontations. It's actually a feature of the site, not a bug. And if they're going to take that on, they have to really think of what kind of business model they want going forward.
Tim O'Brien, thank you so much for being with us. It's always enlightening. Tim O'Brien is a senior columnist with Bloomberg Opinion, talking about his column on this issue about Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook reaching this tipping point with staff members staging walkouts to protest Mark Zuckerberg's approach to the issue. Although, Paul, it is interesting to see markets are taking this the other way, with Facebook shares doing better than Twitter as they take opposite stances in this issue. Right now, let's head down to our 99.1 studios in Washington,
D.C. Nathan Hager there with world and national headlines. Nathan.
Lisa, President Trump says he wasn't the one who gave the order to clear protesters outside the White House Monday night so he could have that photo in front of a fire-damaged church. The president and U.S. Park Police have been criticized for using smoke canisters and pepper balls to clear that peaceful protest. In a radio interview with Fox News, the president said the massive deployment of National Guard and federal law enforcement in the nation's capital is an example states can follow. That's getting some pushback from Defense Secretary Mark Esper.
The option to use active duty forces in a law enforcement role should only be used as a matter of last resort and only in the most urgent and dire of situations. We are not in one of those situations now. I do not support invoking the Insurrection Act.
In a news conference today, Esper also called George Floyd's death at the hands of Minneapolis police murder and a horrible crime. The recent unrest appears to be sparking a dramatic rethink within Joe Biden's presidential campaign. His speech in Philadelphia yesterday may have hinted at it.
We've got to now vow to make this at least an era of action and reverse the systemic racism with a long overdue concrete changes.
The Washington Post reports some of those concrete changes the former vice presidents talked about include a push for expedited police reform, paying half the salaries of furloughed workers during the pandemic, and setting up a vast healthcare workforce to tackle COVID-19 and opioids. The Trump administration is suspending passenger flights from airlines based in China. An order issued by the Transportation Department says it is retaliation for Beijing barring U.S. carriers from re-entering the country. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. This is Bloomberg.
Debbie Hart is president of BioNJ, which represents the interests of more than 400 New Jersey-based biotech companies. She's also a strong voice in the biotech sector, supporting research universities like New Jersey Institute of Technology. She sees NJIT as a valuable partner in attracting venture capital and biotech startups to the Garden State.
So the number one reason that companies come here to New Jersey for the biotech industry is for our talent. We estimate that there were about 30 biotech companies in the early 90s in New Jersey, about 80 in 1998. Today there are more than 400. And that growth continues, and it's come from every possible angle. Other countries, other states, they've spun out of our academic institutions as well as our biotech and our pharma companies, and we expect that growth to continue long into the future. And NJIT is a pipeline for talent, for companies, for entrepreneurs to do that important work.
NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology. Learn more at njit.edu.
President of the Jewish Communal Fund, Zoya Raines, and her husband Robert Friedman, Jewish activists and philanthropists, talk about why they chose the Jewish Communal Fund for their charitable giving.
As very busy working parents, we wanted to focus more on the charity part of it and wanted to focus more on our children and less on the administration.
The Jewish Communal Fund is one of the oldest and largest donor-advised funds, but at the same time, they're totally up to date and have state-of-the-art systems for us to access and manage our contributions online. The assets in our fund at the JCF grow tax-free, so we can generate more charitable dollars to support the charities that we care about most.
Let JCF minimize your taxes and maximize your charitable giving.
We're incredibly passionate about our charity, and the JCF allows us to focus more on the charity and less on the administration and the headaches.
For more information about Jewish Communal Fund, visit our website at jcfny.org and request a new fund kit.
This is an important update from the government about coronavirus. We all need to stay alert so we can control the virus and reduce the risk of infection. Staying alert means you must stay at home as much as possible. Work from home if you can. Limit contact with others. Keep your distance if you go out. And wash your hands regularly. Do not leave home if you or anyone in your household has symptoms. Stay alert. Control the virus. Save lives.
Whoa, just got a Moonpig reminder that it's your birthday Saturday.
Yeah, I set that up.
Oh, do you know what? I forget one time. Okay, I'm in the app.
Oh, the romantic card section.
I'm full of surprises. Now, what rhymes with babe?
How about just uploading a nice pic? No, wait, I'm not ready.
Hey, I love you from every angle. Now for the gifts. Oh, and flowers.
Heartfelt can happen anywhere with moonpig.com. Download the app now.
Looking for your daily fix of NFL news and analysis?
In that. So we had to blow it up and do Super Bowl predictions instead.
Look no further than the Pick 6 podcast, where CBS sports writer Will Brinson gets you up to speed with what's trending in the NFL that day, so that you're always in the know.
Yeah, it's pretty revealing of Brinson's methodology for predictions. When he gets mad at people for predicting good teams are going to win the Super Bowl or good players are going to win major awards. That's how you wind up.
Search Pick 6 on TuneIn to listen.
With millions of podcasts dropping new episodes all the time, how do you keep up with all your favorites? TuneIn makes it easy. Simply head to the home screen and find your new episode section to see the latest additions.
Who says you can't have a laugh while getting serious about America's pastime? On the daily podcast Locked On MLB, comedian and baseball fanatic Paul Francis Sullivan talks about each team, each pennant race, and everything else in the game. From rule changes and controversies to baseball cards and stadium food.
For those of you who are not familiar with me or the old show, I love to obsess over baseball. I'm talking baseball over the Super Bowl. We had a TV showing the division series during my wedding.
Search Locked On MLB on TuneIn to listen today.
Want to relive the glory of college football?
Balls over a man, into the end zone.
Come explore TuneIn's classic game replay collection to hear ESPN's complete coverage of the 2019 New Year's 6 bowl games. Don't miss your chance to re-experience the Rose Bowl, the 2020 National Championship, featuring Clemson and LSU.
There's going to be 2 champions on the field tomorrow night. There's going to be 1 team hold up the trophy.
10, plays to the 5, touchdown!
Search classic game replays to listen for free.
With the NHL season temporarily on ice, now is a good time to catch up on past games.
This shot score, Malkin again! Bergeron, he scores!
With game replay on TuneIn, you can listen to every power play, slap shot, and goal of the 2019-2020 season so far.
Suter to Cunnin to Fiala, he scores!
For a limited time, it's free for hockey fans everywhere. Search classic game replays to start listening.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
It's TuneIn Sports on this day. On this day in 1980, the New York Mets draft Darryl Strawberry at age 18.
Here's Darryl warming up their third pitcher. Well hit to left center field. Out of here. Darryl Strawberry's first major league home run. Strawberry goes to the opposite power alley with great authority. It's a 2-run home run.
To listen to conversations breaking down the moments just like this, search sports to be part of the discussion on TuneIn.
And breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Stocks are extending a multi-day rally with the gauge of global equities rising for an 8th straight day as investors cling to optimism for a quick economic recovery from the pandemic. Banks are leading the S&P toward a 3-month high. We look at the numbers every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg Radio. The S&P's up 1.1%, up 35. The Dow's up 1.6%, up 415. And the Nasdaq's up 0.5%, up 52. The 10-year is down 22.30 seconds with a yield of 0.75%. West Texas Intermediate crude oil is down 0.8% now, 36.51 a barrel, with COMEX gold down 1.8% at 17.0240 an ounce. The dollar yen is at 108.95. The euro $1.1240, and the British pound $1.2597. Theater chain AMC Entertainment is seeking to tame its debt load by asking subordinated bondholders to accept a steep haircut on existing debt as it casts doubt on its ability to repay future borrowings. They're asking investors to take cuts of about 50% from full face value on existing debt. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. I'm Greg Jarrett.
This is Bloomberg Markets with Lisa Abramowitz and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Bloomberg Markets is brought to you by Commonwealth Financial Network. For the 6th straight time, J.D. Power ranks Commonwealth #1 in independent advisor satisfaction among financial investment firms. Visit Commonwealth.com to learn more. And it does appear that the unrest has been dying down in cities across the nation, Paul. For the most part, anecdotally, we have heard that protests have been peaceful, although there there has been an element that has come in and been incredibly violent and destructive in cities across the board, particularly in New York. Right now, to bring us in about the legal implications and what can be done from an executive power perspective with the threat of bringing in military troops, as well as on the local level with the National Guard and just how you deploy your cops. Noah Feldman joining us, professor of law at Harvard University, also a Bloomberg opinion columnist, joining us from Boston, Massachusetts. Noah, Professor Feldman, I'm curious about your take on President Trump's declaration that he would send military troops into the large cities if states and cities did not get their act together. Does he have the power to do that?
Well, like a lot of declarations that President Trump has planned to make but never actually made, we first have to, keep our heads about us and remember that he may actually not do this. It may just be more symbolism than practice. If he does choose to do it, he would have to have specific statutory authority. And the reason for that is that there's a law, which a lot of people have probably heard of, called the Posse Comitatus Act. And that law says that the only way the president can deploy federal troops to execute the laws and enforce the laws is when Congress has specifically authorized him to do so. So the basic framework is there has to be a law that says he can. The law that the president said he would deploy is a very old law, originally passed in 1807, called the Insurrection Act. And I think reasonable lawyers could differ about it, but my own view is that one part of that act almost certainly would allow the president to deploy troops to the cities if, and it's a big if he could determine that they were unable to enforce the law, federal law, on their own.
So, Professor, so that's active troops. How about National Guard? Hasn't the National Guard in the past been deployed for some of these types of operations?
Yes, and in fact, it's deployed in lots of places now. And here's where, things get a little technical. National Guard troops are in the first instance called out by the state governors. That is to say, they work for the governor. The governor gives the orders, and they're arranged by state. When the president designates them as federal forces, they can be turned into federal troops.
Okay.
And then the president would command them. And that hasn't happened yet here, and that's actually extraordinarily unusual.
To be technical, I was actually reading up yesterday on the actual process of getting military troops into local areas. I'm speaking as somebody who lives in New York City, and I'm wondering how there would even be coordination between the military, potentially the National Guard, and then the police force, and how that would all be rolled out. I mean, is there any precedent, given the fact that this is an 1807 law that we're citing here?
Well, with the request of state and local officials, federal troops were called out in the Los Angeles riots in the early 1990s. Those are the riots that broke out after the brutal attack on Rodney King, and then after the police were acquitted. So it has happened, and if there's consent by state and local authorities, or a request by state and local authorities, then it's possible to coordinate all of the different figures that you were thinking about. I mean, another example for New Yorkers, which did not involve an invocation of this particular act, but which involved coordination, was the post 9/11 arrangements. Everyone who lived in New York then at the time, as I did for some of that time, remembers that there were many, many, many different authorities and troops and people who were deployed in Lower Manhattan.
Oh, yeah.
And, it is possible to coordinate. It can be done. It's a very serious undertaking, but it can be done.
So, Professor, just today, Secretary of Defense Esper says that he does not support invoking the Insurrection Act. How important is that statement there? That seems pretty important.
I think it's pretty important. Obviously, the buck stops with the president, not the Secretary of Defense. But since the idea would be to deploy troops, you need the Secretary of Defense to be involved in it. So I would read that as a signal from the Trump administration that they're probably not going to do this. That, as very characteristic of President Trump, he wanted to have the moment on the cameras where he said, I'm prepared to call out the troops, but didn't actually want to do that. I mean, I think one of the profound insights of the Trump era is that the president believes that he can get most of the bang for his buck by saying something without actually subsequently having to do it. And then the rest of us, and this is partly my job, run around explaining, is it lawful? It might not be lawful, and going through all the details, just like we're all doing right now. And in fact, he never intended to do it in the first place. And so, this is not the first or the second or the third or the fifth time that this has happened. So, it raises a real question. I feel that our job is still to explain to people what the law is. So I think we're doing the right thing, but we should always add that caveat that, in fact, it may not happen. And here, the statement by the Secretary of Defense hints to me that it probably won't.
I'm wondering, the altercation that has become very controversial with protesters being cleared away for President Trump to walk over to a church across the street. A lot of people have been pointing that to unfair suppression of First Amendment rights, people who basically were violently removed in order for the president to walk in that way. What's your take on that?
I watched it on television like a lot of other people, and I don't have more information than what I saw on the screen in terms of what actually happened. So that's a first caveat. But what I saw looked like what may have been unconstitutional violation of the free speech rights of peaceful protesters who were in what's called a public forum. That is a park, a place that's open to the public, and which had not been closed off for any particular reason, and who were then summarily moved off. There might be some circumstances where safety requires it, where it's constitutionally permissible to move protesters. I mean, there's sometimes circumstances when the president's got to go somewhere, and he really has to go there. There could be circumstances where protesters might have to be requested to move or made to move. This, watching the video, did not seem like such a circumstance.
Right.
And so, at a minimum, I would say it violated the spirit of the First Amendment very clearly, and it may also have violated the letter of the law.
Noah Feldman, thanks so much for joining us. As always, we appreciate your commentary. Noah Feldman, professor of law at Harvard University, also a Bloomberg opinion columnist, joining us from Boston, Massachusetts. Lisa, looks like Warner Music is back in the public realm. Stock, the IPO priced just this morning at $25 a share, opened at $27 a share, trading up here, kind of reflecting the changing sense of what's going on in the music business. That is, the music business is once again, after 19 years of decline, is actually growing again in terms of revenue, and that's driven really by people renting music, not necessarily owning it, but renting it. So Warner Music opens at 27. This is Bloomberg.
In addition to Bloomberg Radio, you can catch the latest news and biggest newsmakers on Bloomberg Television. Look for us on DirecTV Channel 353 or check your local listings. Interconnect here.
Let's start with the national security implications of this.
Balance of Power with David Weston.
What could the United States do to help?
Weekdays at noon Eastern on Bloomberg Radio. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
With the Bloomberg Small Business Report, I'm John Tucker, brought to you by Dell Small Business. Small businesses in the U.S. healthcare and social assistance industry have emerged as the top recipients of federal coronavirus relief loans. The Small Business Administration says healthcare firms received over 470,000 loans worth about $65.9 billion. That was followed by professional services. Construction and manufacturing were the other two industries with more than 10% of the total funding so far. Through May 30th, almost 4.5 million loans have been approved, worth over $510 billion. The loans can become grants if at least 75% of the proceeds are spent on payroll in the 8 weeks after the money is received. Meantime, firms are pushing Congress to extend the loan forgiveness period to 24 weeks and to allow more flexibility. And that's the Bloomberg Small Business Report. I'm John Tucker.
What's the true value of your custodial relationship? Ben Harrison of BNY Mellon's Pershing explains.
As sophisticated investors demand more from their advisors, advisory firms, in turn, need to rely on their custodian to help them grow their complex businesses. At BNY Mellon's Pershing, supporting the rapid growth of RIAs is our number one priority. We understand what it means to deliver true value to our clients who are looking for a custodian that is aligned with their best interest and delivers high-value solutions, all in an open architecture environment with flexibility, choice, and transparency. Learn why so many of the largest advisory firms turn to us for the financial strength, resiliency, and high-touch service that BNY Mellon Pershing provides. When you work with Pershing, we put your business first. Can your custodian say that?
Learn more at Pershing.com or call 800-445-4467. Pershing Advisor Solutions, LLC. Member FINRA SIPC.
We have to get it right the first time.
We always talk about the losers in a trade war.
You benefit if you're just further away from China.
So that you can too.
What are the ramifications if she crumbles or doesn't crumble?
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business, Radio.com, and iHeartRadio apps, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening. From the financial capital of the world, 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Radio.
From New York to our Bloomberg television and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. This is where the world of politics meets the world of business. I'm David Weston. We begin today with a check on the markets and Abigail Doolittle. So, Abigail, you just can't keep these markets down, and it looks like we're continuing that rotation into cyclicals.
Right on both points, David. It is really a risk-on situation here, which, again, feels very surprising relative to what we have going on here in the U.S. It simply does not seem to fit. Nonetheless, we have stocks up for a fourth day. At this point, we have the S&P 500 and the Dow both up more than 1%. You're mentioning that move into the cyclicals. There's this feeling that that is bullish. There's also a feeling behind that has a lot to do with reopening optimism. You see that the industrials up more than 3%, the banks up nearly 4%. The banks today also being helped out by the fact that haven bonds are really dropping off. The 10-year yield backing up by 6 basis points right now, back above its 50-day moving average in a pretty convincing manner, David. That's the first time that's happened since 2016, suggesting that maybe investors, folks, are going to start moving out of bonds. If that happens, that could be the next big rotation possibility to keep an eye on, out of bonds and into stocks. Should that occur, it would suggest this rally that we're seeing may just have legs and continue.
Yeah, but take the flip side of that, Abigail. It's a really good point. If, in fact, we don't have a rotation out of bonds, does that say something where the equity markets are headed?
It could indeed, because equity investors are certainly always watching bonds. When bonds are in rally mode, as occurred at one point last year, there were a lot of folks who were reluctant to get into stocks because they were curious as to knowing what bonds were telling them. And that was true, too, in the summer of 2018. So if we see bonds sort of stagnate here, that may suggest that the rally that we've seen for stocks will stagnate. Right now, it is largely about the dollar. That is tied into, of course, bonds as well. But the dollar has been weak. So as we have yield simply rising here, the dollar has been going down, the yield curve steepening, supporting that. As we've had the dollar go down over the last several days, David, that has helped out the S&P 500. But that's a great point that you make, because if the move out of bonds doesn't really gain steam, that could suggest that the rally here is capped. It's going to be interesting to see. But the thing that stands out the most, continues to stand out the most, is the fact that you have stocks simply climbing, even though it doesn't feel right, doesn't match not only what has been going on with the pandemic and the economic situation, but certainly the social unrest here in the U.S., even though it is perhaps improving right now, David.
Yeah, right now the news is not making a big difference to the markets. Thank you so much to Abigail Doolittle for that report. But there is a lot of news at the same time. Of course, we have this civil unrest continuing throughout the country, although it was a little less violent last night. President Trump, of course, has had an aggressive response to these riots and these demonstrations, which has brought a lot of criticism, and not all of it just from Democrats. We welcome now Jeannie Zaino. She is our Bloomberg political contributor and, of course, a political science professor at Iona College. Jeannie, great to have you with us as always. Are the Republicans distancing themselves maybe a little bit from President Trump on his aggressive stance?
Yeah, we have seen, it's been, I would say, a muted response on the part of Republicans, although we have seen some take exception, particularly to him standing for the photo op with the Bible in front of the church in Lafayette Square. People like James Langford. But again, the response has been particularly muted, I would describe it as. We have seen some others, particularly in the religious community on the right, say a Pat Robertson, who was a bit critical of the president for that same photo op. We even heard the Pope speak out. So there has been criticism. It's coming from both sides, but certainly it is a lot louder and a lot more critical coming from the left than it is, especially from senators in the Republican side.
So you got your polling, as I recall. So talk to us about particularly the Monmouth poll about right track, wrong track. One that I tend to take a look at with respect to incumbents, 74% wrong track. That's a high number for President Trump.
It's a very high number. Yeah, we had two really important polls out. One is the Monmouth that you talked about. The other one is the Politico. In both cases, you see large numbers of voters saying the country is on the wrong track. 7 in 10 voters in the Politico, and you just mentioned the Monmouth. And we look at the recent Reuters survey about handling of the protest. It's 33% approval. That's just 1/3 to almost 56% disapproval. So these numbers are certainly going in the wrong direction for the president. But that said, I think we have to be a little bit careful about these right track, wrong track polls. This has been sort of the standard in the modern presidency. Both Barack Obama, Bill Clinton were reelected with really high wrong track numbers. And I think we all remember, if we're old enough, those elections. So, you know, it's not something that is going to necessarily hold the president back. It's certainly not what the campaign wants to see. Probably the more important number for the election is his approval rating. And while that has always been fairly mixed, it has not moved that much despite the pandemic and his response to it, and now despite this issue with the rioting and the looting and his handling of this crisis out of Minneapolis. So that has remained fairly steady. And when you talk to the campaign, that's something they consistently want to focus on. And also, most important to remember is that this election will be decided in swing states, and those polls are either Biden ahead or they're fairly close, but certainly the president is not out in those states by any stretch of the imagination.
Exactly. I mean, it's way too soon to tell. We need to look at likely voters, but it looks like almost a jump ball, relatively speaking, right now for the two of them. So let's go over to the other side of the court. Let's talk about former Vice President Joe Biden. He's been relatively quiet. Yesterday, he did come out and make a statement in Philadelphia in a church. What is the proper Biden response? Is he going to change his campaign in response to what's happening across the country?
Yeah, he came out in Philadelphia at the City Hall yesterday. It's one of the real first times he's gotten widespread attention. I think it was covered, the speech he gave was covered on all the cable news shows, and it was a good moment for Biden. It was a particularly strong and powerful speech. And also, if we recall, the reason Biden said he was running for president was because of the racist violence in Charlottesville and what he saw as the president's problematic response to it. That was the whole reason for him to run. So this really was something that is very close to him, and I thought it was a particularly good speech. He talked about the fact he wants to focus on unifying the country, not dividing it, and this is an interesting theme for him because even people on the left have criticized Biden, saying he's not taking a strong enough hand when he talks about being a unifier, and yet at this moment, as we see so much of the widespread protests and the division across the country, it does fit for him to be talking about the president's role is to unify the country and to move forward, and that's what he's been talking about his entire campaign. We only have 5 months until the election, if you can believe it. It's a long time, but it's stunning that it's one of the first times we've seen Biden get this amount of coverage because of the pandemic. He's been basically in his house like so many of us.
Jeannie, can Vice President Biden really take a strong stance as a unifier, as you say, without it appearing he's going soft on violence? Because everybody agrees some of what's been going on in these demonstrations, some of the looting and the violence has not been appropriate. There's a lot of peaceful demonstrators exercising their First Amendment rights, but there appear to be some bad apples in there. Does he have a problem if President Trump sticks with a law and order theme?
You know, I think it's possible for him to do it, and I think he started to do it in his speech yesterday when he tied the president's words and actions, but particularly the president's rhetoric, the talk about vicious dogs, the talk about when the looting starts, the shooting starts. He tied them to a racist past in the United States that's particularly painful for many, many Americans, most Americans. And so he can, I think, walk this between condemning any act of violence, but also tying the president's rhetoric to this racist past and saying that the president, as Biden said yesterday, this pain is real, and the president needs to be part of the solution and not the problem. And as he recounted some of what the president has been doing in the wake of these riots, he described what he saw as somebody who is part of the problem, and his rhetoric on Twitter and elsewhere he used as examples of that. So I do think it's possible. I think it's also going to impact what does going forward by way of choosing a vice president and other steps he takes in his campaign. So I think we sort of have to take a wait-and-see attitude, but I think he got off to a good start on this yesterday.
So, Jeannie, finally, we have a huge issue, obviously, right now in this country. By the way, it's not a new issue. It's been around for an awful long time that we've not properly addressed, in my opinion at least. At the same time, what's going to go on with the economy come November? And this is my central question. Right now, the economy is in very bad shapes, but there is indication that maybe it may be coming back, and certainly the markets are doing particularly well. If come November, the economy certainly isn't where it was before the pandemic, but it's on its way up, and we're really cutting unemployment, things like that, will that cut in President Trump's favor?
It will, and it's so fascinating to hear you and Abigail just talking a few moments ago about stocks climbing. And in some ways, you look at the market and you look what's going on the ground politically in the U.S., and it's almost like you're living in two different worlds. And I do think that there are signs that the president can benefit from. For instance, we are likely to see unemployment go down. Bloomberg was just reporting the number of cases in New York of COVID going down. The people looking at the markets are feeling optimistic that we have, reached a point at which COVID is going to start to go down and we can start to reopen the economy. As unemployment goes down, the president is politically going to take advantage of that, and he's going to take credit for that. And we do have some economists saying that by November, the numbers could look pretty good in his favor. So I think the Democrats are going to try hard to say that this was something of a self-inflicted wound, that had he acted earlier, had he acted in a different way, we might not have had to take the rough step we did of shutting down the economy in the way we did and going through all this pain. But I do think it's a fair question, and this is what the president is hoping, that by this third quarter, as we get into November, those jobs numbers and other numbers in the economy look good, and there's a chance that they will, or they look better, and he can make the case that he's responsible for it, and there's more to come.
Jeannie, always a treat to have you with us. That's Jeannie Zaino. She's our political contributor and also a professor at Iona College. Coming up here, we're going to go over to the Pentagon because the Secretary of Defense today, Mark Esper, said that he really didn't think it was a good idea for the president to send in federal troops to quell the civil unrest. We'll talk with our national defense correspondent. He is Bill Ferries. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio.
When keeping track and
for the friendships, for the fresh air, for the space to grow, for the knowledge, for the sport, for the outdoor education, for the wide horizons, for the academic excellence, for the future. Unleash your child's education at West Buckland School, a co-educational day and boarding school in beautiful North Devon. If you're moving to the southwest for a better quality of life, this is education without compromise, in what the Good Schools Guide called a gem of a school in an exceptional location. To see for yourself, find us at westbuckland.com.
This is an important update from the government about coronavirus symptoms and testing. If you have any one of the following symptoms, a high temperature, a new continuous cough, loss of taste or smell, you can now get tested. Do not leave home for any reason other than to get tested. Find out how to get a test and how long to isolate at nhs.uk/coronavirus. Stay alert. Control the virus. Save lives.
If you can build that flat-pack wardrobe without looking at the instructions, you've still got it. If you can manage 5 keepy uppies on your first go, you've without question still got it. If you can toss a pancake to the ceiling and not let it hit the floor, surely you've still got it. And if you can just about fit into those jeans you bought 5 years ago, you've definitely still got it. Brute, still got it.
The IBM Flash storage solution can be broken down into 3 S's. Speed, retrieve data fast. Scalability, grow your storage as your business grows. Simplicity, easily migrate and integrate with existing systems. Oh, and there's a 4th. It's surprisingly affordable. with a recommended monthly price of £200 for 26 terabytes. Order by the 30th of June and pay nothing for 90 days. Visit ibm.biz/flash offer now.
Get your cook on with Asda, with Uncle Ben's rice 250 grams for just £1. And our Butcher's Selection chicken breast fillets only £3.40 for 650 grams. Why not whack it in the wok? At Asda, we're committed to low prices every day on the quality products you need. Asda. Selected stores and lines subject to availability.
Wanna bet football can make you feel nostalgic?
Playing days are over, so...
On the podcast, NFL Alumni Lounge, Charlie Booth sits down with retired NFL legends to talk about their careers, life after football, and everything in between.
Mr. Darren Waller, good to have you.
Yes, sir, it's good to be here.
Dana White, welcome to the Alumni Lounge.
Thanks for having me, brother.
Big member of our NFL alumni family, the CEO of the XFL, Mr. Oliver Luck.
Charlie, good to see you. Thanks for having me.
We're here with the president, Mr. Eric Price. Good to see you.
Search NFL Alumni Lounge on TuneIn to listen.
Wondering what to play next? Want to know what other TuneIn listeners are listening to right now? Head to the trending section under Browse to explore the most popular stations and podcasts on TuneIn today. Millions of listeners like you can't be wrong.
Want to relive the glory of college football?
Balls over a man, into the end zone,
Come explore TuneIn's classic game replay collection to hear ESPN's complete coverage of the 2019 New Year's 6 bowl games. Don't miss your chance to re-experience the Rose Bowl, the 2020 National Championship, featuring Clemson and LSU.
There are going to be 2 champions on the field tomorrow night. There's going to be 1 team hold up the trophy.
Rise to the 5! Touchdown! Search classic game replays to listen for free.
First, we're told that masks don't work. Then, we're told to wear them all the time. One week, we hear that the mortality rate is 2%. The next, well, who knows? In the time of COVID-19, there is so much uncertainty, and so much scientists are learning in real time, along with the rest of the world. So it's hard to know what you can be sure of and what's still a big question mark. Enter Podcast 19 from 538, where we'll explore the evidence behind the science in our fight against coronavirus. I'm science journalist Anna Rothschild. Each week, I'll investigate coronavirus mysteries, keep track of the latest developments on vaccines and treatments. Oh, and I'll try to edit out all the times I shush my family, since I'm recording this thing from the chaos of my home.
Search Podcast 19 to listen today.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
The Pentagon has wanted to step away from that rhetoric for a few days now. But when in this, particularly in this administration, going very public and laying that out is often not seen in a very positive light within the Oval Office.
Yeah, and let's be clear, Secretary Esper serves at the pleasure of the president, and if the president orders it to be done, it will be done if it's lawful. There isn't much question, is there really, that the president does have the authority under that old Insurrection Act from 1807 to do this if he decides to?
He does. It's something that's been used, previously. It hasn't been used a lot in the last 50 years. I think the last time was during the Los Angeles riots in 1991. It's a law that's been invoked before. It would just be a controversial step to have active duty military forces patrolling American streets. It's just not something we're accustomed to seeing.
Yeah, it's fascinating. There was a piece I'm sure you saw in the Washington Post today that said at least that the leadership in the Pentagon, the civilian leadership, had ordered the Joint Chiefs, the chiefs of the Army, Navy, etc., not to make any comments about the shooting out of Minneapolis. Have you had any reporting on that? And is that typical? Is that normal? Because often I think the chiefs are supposed to be somewhat independent of the political apparatus, aren't they?
Yeah, that's right. I think Esper actually came out today and talked openly about the killing of George Floyd, he said it was a tragedy that happens far too often in this country, and he called it a horrible crime. But I think the Pentagon is trying to clamp down on too many public comments from lower-level officers that they worry will conflict with either an eventual mission to go into the streets or conflict with what perhaps the White House guidance is on this.
What's the next step for the White House, do you think?
Well, I think we have a 2 p.m., I believe, a White House presser. We'll be looking very closely for criticism of Esper, follow-up on this meeting he's having with the president today. We believe that meeting is officially to discuss the situation in Afghanistan, but clearly with Mark Esper making these remarks right before he headed over to the White House, that's going to be a next step. And then I think, a lot will depend on how these protests unfold and whether there really is more pressure from the White House for a active duty military deployment. I think last night Washington was a little more calm, so the pressure eased on that sense. But, it's obviously very fluid and things are changing day by day.
Okay, Bill, really appreciate you taking time to join us today. It's Bill Ferries. He heads our national security team down in Washington. It's time now for Bloomberg First Word News. We go to Mark Crumpton, who has more, I understand, on Secretary Esper. Mark?
David, thank you. As you and Bill were just alluding to, breaking with President Trump, Defense Secretary Mark Esper said today he does oppose using military forces for law enforcement in containing current street protests. Secretary Esper did refer to the Insurrection Act, which would allow the president to use active duty military and law enforcement in containing street protests.
The option to use active duty forces in a law enforcement role should only be used as a matter of last resort, and only in the most urgent and dire of situations. We are not in one of those situations now. I do not support invoking the Insurrection Act.
Secretary Esper making his comments there at the Pentagon today. He added, quote, the National Guard is best suited for performing domestic support to civil authorities in these situations in support of local law enforcement. Pope Francis says he's deeply concerned about the social unrest in the United States. In his weekly greeting, he said racism can't be tolerated. He called the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis tragic and said he was praying for all those who have lost their lives because of, quote, the sin of racism. Iran is seeing a second wave of coronavirus infections. Officials say there were more than 3,100 new cases reported today. That's up 50% from a week earlier. 9 of Iran's 31 provinces are now considered red zones or carry a virus alert warning. Iran began relaxing lockdown measures in early April. Another sign of how relations between the United States and China are getting worse. The Trump administration has warned that it will suspend passenger flights from China if Beijing doesn't allow American carriers to re-enter the market. The coronavirus pandemic prompted flight cuts earlier this year. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. Powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg. David?
Thank you so much, Mark. Coming up later on Balance of Power, we're going to be joined by Leon Panetta, who, of course, was Secretary of Defense, but also the White House Chief of Staff. We're going to talk to him about how a White House handles a cascade of crises such as this White House is facing right now. That's coming up Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio.
Have you wanted to speak a new language, but you thought it'd be too hard or take too much time? Then go to Babbel.com, download the app, and try it for free. In just 15 minutes a day, you'll be on your way to speaking a new language in just a few weeks. And right now, you can try Babbel for free. Babbel starts out teaching you words and phrases by matching them with pictures. You won't believe how easy the interactive program is. Soon the sentences get a little bigger, and before you know it, you're having simulated conversations voiced by native speakers. And because Babbel is crafted by language experts and uses the spaced repetition method, in just 10 to 15 minutes a day, you'll be speaking the language of your choice with real confidence. With Babbel, you can speak a language. Just go to Babbel.com and start your first lesson in the language of your choice for free. Download the Babbel app or go to Babbel.com and try it for free. That's Babbel.com. Bloomberg.com.
Adopt US Kids presents What to Expect When You're Expecting a Teenager. Learning the lingo.
Jelly. Jelly adjective. Jelly is a shorter, better way to say jealous. As in, Chloe, I am like so jelly of your unicorn phone case.
You don't have to speak teen to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same. Visit adoptuskids.org. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Adopt US Kids, and the Ad Council.
You've always relied on Bloomberg's strong Asian presence.
You didn't mention any particular areas in China. Let me just go to Hong Kong.
And now you need it even more.
Where are we in terms of understanding President Xi?
Bloomberg Daybreak Asia.
We're starting to see infections in some of the Asian countries.
Tonight at 6 Eastern.
Do you ever get the feeling some people just weren't prepared?
On Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. It's not time now for our stock of the hour. It is Warner Music Group, which went public earlier today. It had been held off for a day or so. It's gone public, and the price has actually gone up since it started trading. We are joined now by Kayla Lyons to take us through the Warner story.
Yeah, David, it started trading just over half an hour ago. Right now, the stock up the better part of 6%, trading around $28.61 a share. That's after it priced at $25 this morning, the midpoint of the marketing range. It raised about $1.93 billion, in the listing, which I should point out actually upsized 77 million shares, up from just 70 million. It makes it one of the biggest offerings we've seen so far in 2020 and values the company at nearly $13 billion. And of course, David, as you alluded to, this was delayed from yesterday to observe the music industry's Blackout Tuesday to support the protests against police brutality. In fact, it was really delayed about 3 months because of the pandemic. So the fact that this company now has come public, we're seeing it being taken pretty well by the public markets, sends a pretty positive signal about potentially renewed strength of U.S. offerings after we saw those really put on pause for a while because of this pandemic, David.
Yeah, exactly. I wonder whether it says more about the state of the equity market, which is really on its way back, or whether it says more about the state of the music market. Is the music market sort of a stay-at-home kind of business?
Well, it's a little bit of both, isn't it, right? We've seen, obviously, increased demand for risk on the part of investors, and it's not just a big week for Warner Music. We're about to see $6.4 billion in IPOs total this week, so definitely a revival of companies coming to the public markets. But on your point about the music industry, of course, this really is a lot about streaming. Warner Music especially is very catered towards streaming. About 70% of its revenue comes from digital sales. Spotify and Apple, for example, account for about 27% of revenue if you're looking at the last fiscal year. And the fact that everybody is homebound, we can't go out to concerts, etc., to get entertainment, likely is giving an added boost to Warner Music here.
Yeah, and let's be honest, Kayla, I've downloaded more music while I've been stuck at home. I bet you have too. So maybe it's happy days are here again for the music business, which, let's be honest, has really gone up and gone down. Initially, streaming was not too good for it.
Yeah, absolutely. There's been a lot of back and forth for certain. And not only is this good for the music business, but I would point out, too, that the man who really is making all the money from this IPO, Len Blafinick, I'm totally butchering that name. You would do a far better job than I in that name. But he actually is getting 85% of the economic interest in this, 99% of the voting right. It's basically all of the proceeds from this IPO are not going to Warner Music. They're going to him, David.
Boy, that's better even maybe than Mark Zuckerberg. That's a good deal. Okay, thank you so much to Kayla Lyons. Great to have you with us on Warner Music. Coming up next, he ran the Defense Department, the CIA, and also was Chief of Staff to President Clinton. Leon Panetta is here to give us his thoughts on how a government handles the sort of series of crises we're facing right now. That's coming up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. U.S. stocks are climbing. The Dow is up 414 points to 26,157. NASDAQ up 56 points. S&P is up 1%. On the labor front, ADP reports 2.7 million private sector jobs were lost in May, but that's far fewer than the 9 million expected as more Americans went back to work as some businesses reopen. But some of those celebrating now may be the next to worry. Bloomberg Economics thinks a second wave of job cuts may be coming to white-collar workers, with as many as 6 million jobs on the line, including higher-paid supervisors in restaurants and hotels and in finance and real estate. And shares of Cheesecake Factory rose 18% today after the restaurant chain gave an encouraging update on sales in its locations that have reopened. Donna Wilson, Bloomberg Radio.
Hey, y'all, Jeff Foxworthy here. Now, if you've ever found yourself repeating the same thing over and over for 75 years, you might be Smokey Bear.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
That's why I'm filling in for Smokey to switch things up, because there's a lot more to say. And I should know because my grandfather was a firefighter. And one of the things he taught me is that the people that love the outdoors the most are often the ones accidentally starting wildfires, which means always BYOB. No, bring your own bucket to the campfire. And be extra careful with things like burning yard trimmings. Don't just walk away, or chances are you might be starting a wildfire. So for the love of the outdoors, go to SmokeyBear.com to learn more about wildfire prevention. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service, your state forester, and the Ad Council.
Hi, we're the Goo Goo Dolls. We're fortunate that our daughters have what they need to grow and learn. But that isn't the case for nearly 13 million kids in the U.S. that struggle with hunger.
Childhood hunger is a heartbreaking reality that Feeding America is working to change. Each year, the Feeding America network of food banks rescues billions of pounds of good food that would have gone to waste and provides it to families and children in need.
You can help kids in need in your community by visiting feedingamerica.org.
Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Market upheavals.
The narrative is driven by uncertainty about the virus.
Political reversals.
It's not clear that some of the Republicans up on the Hill are agreed with the Republican White House.
Economic shifts.
The macro clearly being driven by the coronavirus outbreak.
Everything seems to be in motion.
Will it also mean a global recession in your view now?
But here, you're on solid ground.
Looking forward to guiding you through all of this.
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
The option to use active duty forces in a law enforcement role should only be used as a matter of last resort and only in the most urgent and dire of situations. We are not in one of those situations now. I do not support invoking the Insurrection Act.
That was the Secretary of Defense, Mark Esper, earlier today saying that he disagreed with the president's suggestion that maybe federal troops could be sent in to quell some of the civil disobedience, to civil unrest across the country. Welcome now somebody who had that job as Secretary of Defense, as well as being Director of CIA and the Chief of Staff to President Clinton at the White House. He is Leon Panetta and the founder of the Panetta Institute for Public Policy. Mr. Secretary, thank you so much for joining us. You have been in the room when all sorts of very difficult situations were addressed. We have a remarkable situation in this country right now with not one, not two, but three crises: the pandemic, the economic collapse, and now we have the civil unrest. What is the best way for a government to address that kind of cascade of crises?
Well, I always found as Chief of Staff and then later as CIA Director and Secretary of Defense that when facing a crisis and when facing a series of crises as we are now, the best approach is to gather the National Security Council together and determine what the best strategy is to deal with each of these crises and to develop options, obviously, to present to the President, but to try to develop at least a common strategy that everybody can support and that is in the best interest of the country in terms of dealing with that crisis. So I think this is a moment when the President needs to listen to the advice of his most experienced advisors. That's critically important at a time when you're facing this kind of serious threat to the country.
Well, we heard from one senior advisor today in his Secretary of Defense, but it was public. It wasn't behind closed doors. Is there any doubt that the President has the authority, the legal authority, to send in federal troops if he so chooses? There is this Insurrection Act.
Well, look, I think it's clear that the President could assert the Insurrection Act. But again, this country has recognized that the purpose of our military is to be trained to confront foreign adversaries in combat. not to be used for riot control or law enforcement. The Posse Comitatus Act was passed in the 1800s for the purpose of making clear that the U.S. military ought not to take the place of law enforcement. And so for that reason, I commend the Secretary of Defense, Esper, for taking the position that he took, because military leaders, almost in unison, do not believe that our military ought to be used to fight our own people. It ought to be used to fight foreign enemies.
Are federal troops even trained to do this? I mean, to pick up on your point, are they trained to deal with crowd control and things like that? Because we have, sadly, in our history, seen instances where some military were brought in who were not properly trained, and we had some tragic results, such as Kent State. You know the military well. Are the federal troops, or some of the federal troops, trained to really be effective in this situation? Is this the best tool in the toolkit?
I don't believe it is, because, why we train our military is to engage in combat with a foreign adversary. That's what they're trained to do. They're not trained on riot control. They're not trained on crowd control. They're not trained on law enforcement. In this country, we believe that law enforcement ought to be left to the states and local communities, and that if necessary, obviously the National Guard can support those efforts. They do get some training in that arena. But U.S. military forces are trained primarily to engage in combat with an adversary, not to fight our own people.
At the same time, we have a difficult problem here that I'm sure you appreciate, which is we have, I think, the vast majority of protesters who are peaceful, are exercising their First Amendment rights to petition for redress of grievances, but there are clearly some bad actors in some of these demonstrations who are prone to violence and trying to instigate something. But put aside the federal military as a tool, what is the best way for the government, the federal government, the state government, to sort those two things out so we maintain law and order, we protect people and property, but we also preserve the rights of those who want to peacefully protest that horrific instance out in Minneapolis?
Well, I think it would be preferable, rather than the president asserting that somehow he'll take control of the situation if others don't. I think the president ought to be offering law enforcement assistance to states and local communities so that they can, in fact, determine whether or not there are criminal elements that are trying to take advantage of these protests. That's a law enforcement issue. That's an FBI issue. That's an intelligence issue. Frankly, the federal government gets good intelligence on those that are trying to conduct those kinds of criminal activities. And so that ought to be shared with state and local law enforcement so that they can play the primary role in trying to maintain order in their communities and in their states.
Mr. Secretary, what could we as a country learn from the military on the subject of race? Put aside their active involvement in any peacekeeping missions, but the U.S. military was there ahead of a lot of the rest of the society, going back to the days of Harry S. Truman when he was president. In the military, you have a much more integrated, I think, military than most companies do across the country. What have you learned from that? What could you teach society? Because goodness knows, it appears we need to learn some things fast.
I think the military is a good example for the rest of the country in terms of allowing minorities, allowing others to be able to serve their country, and to be part of a unit working together to accomplish a common mission. My experience is that whether you're black or whether you're brown or whether you're a woman, that you should have the opportunity to serve this country. And that's exactly what happens in our military. We ought to be very proud of the fact that we have a broad cross-section of our citizenry that are part of our military force. And they respect each other. They operate under discipline, but they respect and work with each other, regardless of race or color or creed. And that is what the rest of our society needs to learn, that we have to work with each other, regardless of race or color or creed, and understand that first and foremost, we are all citizens of this country. We're not black, we're not white, we're not Asian. We are all American citizens who need to work and respect each other. That's the primary theme that our forefathers built into our Constitution, and frankly, that all of us have to respect if we're going to be able to have a society that truly provides equal justice for all.
And finally, Mr. Secretary, give us a sense of the role that psychology plays in addressing any of these crises such as we have, because we have issues with respect to people feeling comfortable to go back out again, to go to restaurants, to go and gather again. How do we make sure that they feel safe? How do we make sure employees feel safe? And for that matter, how do we make sure that people living in cities where there are demonstrations feel safe? What is the president's role, the governor's role in trying to restore our confidence in this society?
Well, that's the critical question that I think we're all confronting as a country. We're facing a unique set of circumstances between a pandemic that is uncertain in terms of its impact. It's already taken over 100,000 lives in our country, has shut down our economy and our jobs and our businesses. And at the same time, we have this racial issue which developed with this horrible situation with George Floyd and the knee that was placed on his neck, which I think created even greater concerns about our society and whether or not we're true to who we are as a people. I think this is a time, frankly, not to threaten, not to bully, not to yell at each other, but to do some listening to each other as to what the American people are confronting. And to understand that we really are in this together. I think de Tocqueville thought that the greatest strength in our country and the greatest trait of Americans is that we care for our community. We care for our community. I think we ought to take that value and apply it to each of these crises. We are in this together as Americans, and we have to work together. This isn't one side against the other side. The last thing we should do is to polarize this country at a time when we're facing these crises. The purpose, I think, of leadership in this country has to be to bring us together, to unify this country, so that we all understand the importance of making sure not just that we preserve peace, but that we preserve the health of all Americans.
Mr. Secretary, I cannot thank you enough. Thank you so much for joining us. It was great to have you with us. That's former Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta. Coming up here, we're going to talk with Jason Furman of the Kennedy School about the state of the economy. That's coming up on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio.
Reopen.
For the friendships, for the fresh air, for the space to grow, for the knowledge, for the sport, for the outdoor education, for the wide horizons, for the academic excellence, for the future. Unleash your child's education at West Buckland School, a co-educational day and boarding school in beautiful North Devon. If you're moving to the southwest for a better quality of life, this is education without compromise, in what the Good Schools Guide called a gem of a school in an exceptional location. To see for yourself, find us at westbuckland.com.
This is a message from the government about the next stage of controlling coronavirus with NHS Test and Trace. To protect your friends and family, testing and tracing must become a new way of life. If you have symptoms, you need to get a test immediately. Don't leave home for any other reason. If you test positive, we will contact you to trace people who you might have infected. From now on, if you're told you've been exposed to an infected person, you must self-isolate for 14 days. Play your part and do the right thing so we can safely return to a more normal life. Go to nhs.uk or call 119. Stay alert. Control the virus. Save lives.
At Asda, we've provided 3,500 care homes with priority access to delivery slots, and priority shopping hours are open to our care workers. We're also donating 250,000 face masks to care homes. Asda, we're all in this together. Please show ID for priority shopping. Check asda.com for times.
Whoa, just got a Moonpig reminder that it's your birthday Saturday.
Yeah, I set that up.
Oh, do you know what? I forget one time. Okay, I'm in the app.
Oh, the romantic card section.
I'm full of surprises. Now, what rhymes with babe?
How about just uploading a nice pic? No, wait, I'm not ready.
Hey, I love you from every angle. Now for the gifts. Oh, and flowers.
Heartfelt can happen anywhere with moonpig.com. Download the app now.
Let's be honest, we all spend too much of our day on social media. But at least you can spend your endless scroll time to discover new things on TuneIn. Follow @TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to always be in the know about the best new stuff streaming in the app. From breaking news stories and live sporting events.
Yeah, but it's unique times. I think there's unique circumstances, and we're trying
to stand out stations and podcasts. Stay in touch with TuneIn. Where do sports, culture, and basketball nostalgia collide? On their podcast, Knuckleheads, NBA veterans Quentin Richardson and Darius Miles sit down with athletes, musicians, and entertainers to get brutally honest, totally unguarded conversations about everything, from current events to untold stories from the golden era of sports.
Neil. You know that, right? I tried to tip dunk all the free throw line one time.
Search Knuckleheads on TuneIn to listen.
Okay, here we go.
With the NFL draft in the books and the schedule set, check out a TuneIn podcast for daily updates on the lead up to the 2020 season. Like the Ringer NFL show, where a rotating cast of Ringer experts talk with players, coaches, and special guests about the NFL landscape.
A lot of the other teams that we consider...
Or ESPN's NFL Live.
If there are some delays because of the COVID-19...
Search sports on TuneIn to explore these pods and much more.
This is Mike Tirico, introducing you to Sports Uncovered.
When I lose the sense of motivation and the sense of to prove something as a basketball player, it's time for me to move away from the game of basketball.
Quote unquote, I'm back.
I'm back. The two-word facts from Michael Jordan announcing the most famous comeback in NBA history.
That's the most impactful 2 words ever.
Search Sports Uncovered to listen on TuneIn today.
With millions of podcasts dropping new episodes all the time, how do you keep up with all your favorites? TuneIn makes it easy. Simply head to the home screen and find your new episode section to see the latest additions.
Ready for some straight talk on what's happening in the MLB? On the Barstool Sports Podcast starting 9, Dallas Braden and Jared Carrabis cut through the BS to break down the league the way they really see it.
Yeah, we're continuing our little mini-series of college baseball coaches in addition to bringing you major league players from throughout the league. If you've been listening to Starting 9 for some time now, you know that we've had a big leaguer on every single episode for probably 2 years now.
Search Starting 9 on TuneIn to listen.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
Within the CARES Act will also be needed.
Explain particularly the situation with unemployment, if you will, because we now are hearing some people saying maybe we went too far, at least at the time, with some of the unemployment insurance, because it actually paid people more for being out of work than in work. As we look forward to possible extension of those benefits, should we be tapering them down somewhat so we don't have a perverse incentive?
I think tapering them down would be a good idea, but it's really important that something gets continued. Is unemployment insurance, you always want to do the balance of what you're doing to protect people versus incentives to work. When the biggest problem in the economy right now is that there aren't jobs that people can do. The problem is not so much with the labor supply, it's with the labor demand. So I don't think it's causing a big problem right now. But as the unemployment rate comes down, definitely it should be tapered and ideally switch to a system that was more like you got 90%, 80% of the wages you were getting on your job rather than this fixed $600 a week.
So, Jason, let's try to address that need for labor demand, and let's go to infrastructure. We talked with the governor of New Jersey last week. He's Phil Murphy, and he said he needs a big infrastructure project. That's something Andrew Cuomo said as well. Is this a time we could actually help some of that labor demand just by a really big infrastructure project? Goodness knows we could use the infrastructure.
The number one priority right now is the immediate relief, the relief for states and localities, for the unemployed and the like. But I think given the magnitude of the supply shock, given the magnitude of the reallocation shock, that we're going to have a job shortage in 2021, 2022, 2023 and beyond, and infrastructure is one great way to fill that. So if we take a couple extra months to do the infrastructure bill, I don't think that's tragic, but one should certainly happen.
Okay, Jason, really appreciate you being with us today. That is Dr. Jason Furman of the Kennedy School. I'm delighted to say he's going to be staying with us in the second hour of Balance of Power. We're going to talk about some of the structural inequalities, economic inequalities in the country and what we could do about them. In the meantime, here, we're going to be talking next with Bill Cassidy. He's the Republican senator from Louisiana, who wants to make sure we protect the rights of people peacefully to demonstrate, but we don't allow the violence. We're going to ask him how he's going to get that done. That's on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio.
In these times of loss and crisis, the people you trust to ask the questions you need answered become even more vital.
Should the president, though, impose the Defense Production Act?
Carol Masser and Jason Kelly.
Help us understand what we know so far.
Bloomberg Business Week.
They are on the front line of the impact of the coronavirus.
Weekday afternoons at 2 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
To buy your home, you became a house hunting ace, learned about loans, scoured neighborhoods, and asked the right questions. Now you're queen of your castle. If you manage that, you can get your retirement plan on track. Visiting aceyourretirement.org can help. With 401k tips and smart saving strategies, you'll feel empowered to own your retirement like you own your home. Go to aceyourretirement.org. Because when it comes to clearing financial hurdles, you're an ace. Brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
25 years ago, NJIT graduate Dick Sweeney co-founded Keurig Green Mountain, a company whose incredible innovations changed the way the world brews a cup of coffee. Today, he lectures widely on business leadership and is a strong advocate for NJIT's work to combine business education with the power of STEM.
NJIT is definitely fostering the innovative thinking for budding entrepreneurs simply because that's the world we live in. NJIT is producing students that have been trained, educated, and given the business acumen to be a contributor to a company. The distinct mission is to develop great STEM scholars. The attributes I've always looked for in team members are heart, smarts, guts, and luck. So we want people with passion, intelligence, courage, and never discount luck. The student coming out of NJIT has experienced all of that.
NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology. Learn more at njit.edu.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. I think it's fair to say the big story in the United States of America this week has been the continuing civil disobedience and continuing civil unrest across the country in the wake of that terrible incident up in Minneapolis. And the question is how we can preserve the best of the peaceful protests. They have the right to do that on the First Amendment at the same time that we weed out some of the people who clearly are in it for mischief and mayhem. We welcome now Senator Bill Cassidy. He's Republican of Louisiana. Welcome, Senator. It's great to have you with us. I know that's something that you have talked about. Do you have any thoughts about how we can do that, preserve the best of peaceful protest and not have the violence we've seen?
Yeah, we have to think about it. One, I think there's legitimate concerns that have to be addressed. I've been speaking to law enforcement back home, and one thing struck me, that when you look at the picture from New Orleans, the New Orleans Police Department is kneeling in prayer with protesters, asking divine guidance to find solutions to problems. Elsewhere, you have people rioting. Now, what is the difference? Well, among other things I've learned, the New Orleans Police Department has implemented a program called EPIC. Ethical Policing is Courageous. And if one officer has just lost it, for whatever reason, the other officer, no matter what the difference in rank, of longevity, seniority, you name it, has the ability to tap the first officer on the shoulder and says, I'm taking over. And that way there's mutual accountability. What has happened with that sort of change in training has been much greater community acceptance and cooperation, decreased complaints about the police department, but also the police themselves more satisfied, less stressed. And so I think that sort of training needs to be taken nationwide. That's what I'm talking to others about.
Boy, that sounds like a very sensible program. Let me ask you the question of the day, the moment right now, and that has to do with use of federal troops, because President Trump had said he would send them in if some states, some cities couldn't get things under control. He has Secretary of Defense today, Mark Esper, come out and say he thinks that's a bad idea. The federal troops aren't the best to get that done. You should use people trained specially for that. Do you have a view on that? Whether it's lawful or not, and most people agree it would be lawful for the president to do it, he has that right. Is it the best tool in the toolbox for this problem?
It does not seem to be the best tool. And obviously National Guard can be called as a step before that. It does appear as if National Guard can be effective. So simple answer, does not seem to be the best tool. Acknowledging that it's been done in the past. In 1968, I think it was done again by H.W. Bush under Rodney King, but it does not seem to be the best tool now.
What about the larger underlying issues here that we've had in this country for a good long time? I'm old enough to remember 1968, 1969, and what was going on. It seems like we didn't get them fixed. Are there things that we can do, and let's be frank, Congress, what the president could do to try to address some of the great and growing inequalities, economic inequalities between black and brown people on the one hand and white people on the other?
Let's back up a little bit. I think there's actually been great advance. If you think about 1968, there was no sense of ownership by those in the minority community relative to the majority community. Now we have the mayor of Atlanta saying, if you're running down the street with a stolen Gucci purse, you're not protesting George Floyd's death. You see YouTubes of Black Lives Matter members taking a young white hoodlum who appears to be a member of Antifa, breaking up stones to throw, taking them over and handing them to the police so that their anarchism does not corrupt the peaceful protest about George Floyd's death. So we've made progress. We've made a lot of progress. We have to build upon that. I would also point out that before the coronavirus, the economic recovery had risen all boats, so that African Americans had the lowest unemployment rates they had had in the history of statistics. Similarly for Hispanics, similarly for veterans, for the disabled, etc. Now, what we need to do is build upon that. But then I go back to the next step. What happened? Everybody has economic dislocation. The idea that you're losing your job because of coronavirus and maybe a greater risk if you continue to work because of the nature of your work clearly is going to add stress to the society. So we need to address the underlying racism and brutality that is still evident in some communities. Absolutely. We have to show one another that we care for each other. Absolutely. Root out the violence that infiltrates a peaceful movement. Absolutely. Go back to that economic prosperity that rises all ships in a way which addresses inequality. That's where we have to also have a component. One more thing, you got to also take care of coronavirus, because right now that's doing a lot to precipitate the uncertainty that we're describing.
Yeah, so well said. Thank you so much. It's easy to forget how well some of the poorest among us were doing before this coronavirus. Thank you so much. That is Senator Bill Cassidy, Republican of Louisiana. That does it for the television portion of Balance of Power. We'll continue on radio for the second hour. We're going to talk again with Jason Furman about inequality, as well as with the Massachusetts Attorney General. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio.
This is a Bloomberg Pursuits look at luxury. Canyon Ranch bills itself as a place where wealthy guests can get away from the stress of modern life. Unfortunately, modern stresses can't be stopped with COVID-19, forcing Canyon Ranch's owner to seek mortgage relief. John Goff's Crescent real estate empire has about $150 million in debt on the two luxury spas and skipped roughly $363,000 monthly mortgage payments in April and May. Bars and restaurants are slowly reopening, but many Americans are content to keep drinking on the couch. Sales of liquor for home consumption with delivery services such as Drizzly are still about 400% above historical levels. Sotheby's evening sales of Impressionist, modern, and contemporary art next month will be the first big test of the art market since the pandemic began. The New York auction will be streamed on June 29th with an auctioneer in London. A bank of screens will show bidders from around the world. I'm Andrew O'Day, Bloomberg Radio.
Working from home, take a little more time for breakfast. Tom Keene.
How will this pandemic change your NASDAQ?
Jonathan Farrow.
When you look at that sector, some of these companies won't exist, will they?
And Lisa Abramowitz.
They've only continued to increase the delinquencies and defaults.
Crunch data topped with fresh world news. Bloomberg Surveillance. Weekday mornings at 7 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. And now, watch us on Bloomberg Television.
There are everyday actions to help prevent the spread of respiratory diseases. Wash your hands. Avoid close contact with people who are sick. Avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. Stay home when you are sick. Cover your cough or sneeze. Clean and disinfect frequently touched objects with household cleaning spray. For more information, visit cdc.gov/COVID-19. This message brought to you by the National Association of Broadcasters and this station.
Asset managers who seize change to launch new strategies, add distribution channels, or exploit new technology to re-engineer the investor experience are often rewarded. However, in an industry paralyzed with complexity, few act with agility or decisively. Few run their businesses strategically, yet the most competitive managers in the market know with the right partner and a flexible operating system, you can. Go boldly toward change with SEI Investment Manager Services.
Determination and operational strength are both essential factors for growth in asset management. I'm Steve Meyer, President and Head of SEI's Investment Manager Services Division. We know that disruptive forces create opportunities around the world. If you see potential in change, our industry specialists will maximize SEI's integrated platform of data and risk management, global investment operations, compliance support, and investor services to position your asset management business for success. Come grow with us.
With SEI Investment Manager Services, you lead the charge in a competitive marketplace. Learn more at SEIC.com/seize change.
From the financial capital of the world, 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pellet. Stocks are higher across the board. This update brought to you by SEI. Visionary asset managers find opportunity where others are challenged. Exploit disruption's potential with SEI's global operating platform. Find out how at SEIC.com/IMS. We begin with a developing story. The Federal Reserve is expanding the number and type of entities that can tap a muni facility. Again, this headline from the Bloomberg Professional Service. Federal Reserve expanding the number and type of entities that can tap the financial instrument. We've got the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ all advancing right now. Dow Jones Industrial Average up 31 points, a gain there of 1%. S&P is higher by 31 points. The Dow up 384, up 1.5%. NASDAQ up 44. That is a gain of 0.5%. 10-year down 23 seconds with a yield right now of 0.76%. And we've got gold down 1.6%. Right now, $16.99 the ounce. Gold back below $1,700. Again, repeating the headline from the top, the Federal Reserve is expanding the number and type of entities that can tap a muni facility. And we've got crude oil down now by 0.9%. With more on crude trading today, here's Bloomberg's Renita Young.
OPEC Plus leaders gave fellow members an ultimatum. Stop cheating on oil output quotas, or the strict measures that have revived oil prices may start to be phased out. Without a meeting to make changes to the OPEC Plus deal, the group is due to start easing its cuts next month. That would potentially add millions of barrels a day of supply into what is still a tentative demand recovery as the world emerges from coronavirus lockdown. Renita Young, Bloomberg Radio.
And again, West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.8%, 36.55 a barrel. And again, just a few more details now about the Federal Reserve announcement. The Fed announcing it will expand an emergency lending program for state and local governments to include smaller borrowers. Central banks saying in a statement, quote, under the new terms, all states will be able to have at least 2 cities or counties eligible to directly issue notes. Right now, stocks pushing higher with the S&P up by 1%, 102 on Wall Street. Time now for the Market Drivers Report with a focus on American depository receipts. And here's Dave Wilson.
Thanks, Charlie. ADRs are rising more than U.S. shares. The S&P ADR index is up 2%, and the S&P 500 is only higher by 1%. France's AXA has risen 10.5% in U.S. trading. The insurance company reduced its proposed dividend for 2019 by about 50% rather than eliminating the payout as others have done. And AXA said an extra dividend may be paid in the fourth quarter to offset the cut. Now, South African ADRs are higher after the country's benchmark stock index climbed to a 3-month high. Standard Bank has gained 11.4%, and oil and chemical company Sasol has risen 8%. Brazil's JBS has fallen 2.5%. The CEO of the meat processor's U.S. unit Pilgrim's Pride was among those indicted by a federal grand jury in Colorado. The indictment stemmed from an alleged conspiracy to fix prices and rig bids for chickens. And another Brazilian company, Braskem, has lost 2.6%. The petrochemical company reported a first quarter loss as revenue dropped for the fourth straight quarter, Charlie.
We thank you very much, Dave Wilson, keeping track of those American depository receipts. Again, recapping equities higher. S&P up 31, a gain of 1%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
This is Balance of Power.
Everybody in the world has one common enemy, and that's to win the war against this virus.
The first thing you do is listen to the medical professionals.
Those people that lost their pay, we want to see that pay continued.
Where the world of politics meets the world of business.
Our priority is the health and well-being and the lives of the American people.
We want to make sure that we are continuing to support our hospitals.
We've unleashed our most potent weapon of all, the courage of the American people.
Balance of Power with David Weston on Bloomberg Radio.
Demonstrations continue around the United States, but are less violent. Markets continue to push upward, looking past the civil unrest, and leaders press for more fundamental change in racial inequality. From New York, welcome to the second hour of Bloomberg Balance of Power. I'm David Weston. The civil unrest seen in the United States over the last week was triggered by the killing of a black man by a white Minneapolis police officer, now in jail charged with his murder. But the underlying conditions go beyond concerns over police brutality gone uncorrected. Inequality has been growing for a generation in the United States. Economic inequality, educational inequality, inequality of opportunity. To help us talk about what can be done to change the system, Jason Furman has remained with us from the first hour of Balance of Power. He is professor of the practice of economic policy at Harvard's Kennedy School and was the chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors under President Obama. So, Dr. Furman, thank you so much for remaining with us. I mean, just to tick off a few things, there's a piece on the Bloomberg actually today, a really compelling piece, saying the unrest spotlights the depth of black Americans' economic struggles. The death rate from coronavirus is 2.4 times that among blacks as it is among white. The net worth overall in the country of black families is 10% of whites. It has a higher unemployment rate, and frankly, blacks and Hispanics have borne the brunt of the jobs lost from COVID virus. So, as I say, the police brutality, the inexplicable police brutality triggered this, but there's a bigger cause. What has given us this sort of inequality, economic inequality, inequality of opportunity, and what can we do about it?
Yeah, that's
a small question.
That's a big, important question.
Yeah,
and the only reason I'm laughing is just so profound problem in the U.S. economy. It's a profound problem that's grown for decades. Part of it is well explained by just competitive labor markets. There's been a demand for workers with greater skills, as you've seen more automation. And then we haven't met that demand by improving, education. The United States is about 20th in the OECD in terms of 3- and 4-year-olds being in preschools. We do an inadequate job of K through 12, and there's too many people who find they can't afford to go to college. So education is part of it. But it goes beyond that to just worker power in labor markets themselves, which has diminished in the United States. Discrimination has remained prevalent. And so there's just a lot of causes of this and a lot of solutions that we'll need to pursue.
So let's go back, if we can, in time to the Obama administration where you served. Were there initiatives that President Obama initiated to try to address this? Or for that matter, President George W. Bush or President Clinton? Have there been attempts to try to fix this, at least since that so-called war on poverty with Lyndon Baines Johnson?
There are some things that we've gotten actually better at over time, which is using the, what economists would call the tax and transfer system. A program like the Earned Income Tax Credit provides a subsidy to lower income working people with children. That was expanded by Clinton, Bush, and Obama, and it lifts, tens of millions of people together with other programs above the poverty line. So we've done a better job at that. Where we've done a much less good job is at inequality in market incomes. The minimum wage, the last time it was legislated to increase was 13 years ago. There's been a lot of inflation in the last 13 years, no change at all in the federal minimum wage. So changing, what people make, not just what they get from the government, is really, really important.
Have we made it worse with some of the things that we have felt we've needed to do to save the economy? And I'm going back now to 2008, 2009, where we injected so much liquidity into capital markets. And for good and sufficient reason, I'm not saying that we shouldn't have done it. We probably needed to do it to avoid a depression. At the same time, the money tends to stick at the top with those who own capital, people who own assets, because the asset value goes up. Are we making inequality worse by the way that we're trying to bail things out? And that comes to this time right now.
Yeah, I'm not going to criticize the Fed, and I realize you weren't, for doing too much. I'll criticize everyone but the Fed for doing too little. The Fed, unfortunately, has better tools for Wall Street than for Main Street. Yeah. Wall Street matters for Main Street. If Ford Motor Company couldn't issue corporate bonds, they'd be laying off a lot of workers right now. So I don't think there's a sharp distinction between them. But it's a problem that the Fed has done a very good job, but it's best at dealing with Wall Street, not Main Street. And for Main Street, you really need the Congress. You need them to pass legislation. They did too little in the wake of the financial crisis. This time they're off to a good start, but we'll need to continue to do a whole lot more.
At the same time, all of us need Main Street, don't we? In this sense, this affects consumer confidence. I mean, when people really are afraid to go out and spend money because of what's going on, because of civil unrest and things like that, that's not good for any of us.
Yeah. Oh, no. I think this is a tragedy that goes far beyond the economy or anything you could quantify in terms of GDP. But, at the very least, Alan Greenspan, not a famous left-wing radical, was about 15 years ago warned that inequality was a threat to democratic capitalism. You need everyone to think the system is fair. You need everyone to think they have a shot. You need everyone to contribute. Otherwise, we're all going to lose out.
Do the Democrats have a specific plan that would help?
The Democrats have a lot of plans. I think many of them would help. A lot of focus on education, which I think is really important. A focus on making the overall fiscal system more progressive, which I think is really important. Raising the minimum wage, which you could debate what the number is and how fast, but it absolutely should be raised.
Yeah, maybe a more progressive tax system as well. Many thanks now to Jason Firmer of the Kennedy School. Really good of you to stay with us, Jason. Appreciate it. Coming up, a detestable rally. That's what Bloomberg Markets editor John Author calls it, but it's going ahead nonetheless, whether we detest it or not. And he's going to be here to explain why it's detestable and why it keeps going ahead. That's coming up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio.
What began in China has expanded worldwide.
Is it China that's going to lead that consumer recovery?
What have we learned?
I'm curious as to what you're monitoring most closely in the news flow.
What can we predict?
Are you seeing a time when you can expect recovery in global travel?
Bloomberg Daybreak Asia.
If people realize that those numbers are going to get a lot worse.
Tonight at 6 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
Hi, everyone. Al Roker here. As a guy with his own catchphrase, I appreciate that after 75 years, Smokey's only said,
only you can prevent wildfires.
but I'm filling in because there's a lot more to report. Like when it's dry or windy. Be careful burning yard waste, because wildfires can even start in your neck of the woods. Go to SmokeyBear.com to learn more about wildfire prevention. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service, your state forester, and the Ad Council.
It's a stock market driver.
Now they're starting to see a little bit of panic from policymakers.
It's a global political force.
How will this epidemic reshape big tech and its relationship with Washington?
It's a virus.
This coronavirus is a global pandemic.
Is there a safe haven?
And the facts matter.
The situation is so bad because of the virus that is simply unavoidable.
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
To protect his home and family from disaster, Steve used courage, wisdom, and his camera phone.
That should do it.
Way to go, Steve! By simply taking digital pictures of his family's important documents, Steve can always have them stored safely online, no matter when disaster strikes. Learn other simple ways to protect your home and family before a natural disaster at ready.gov. That's ready.gov. A message from FEMA and the Ad Council.
Are you interested in a challenging... This is an important update from the government about coronavirus symptoms and testing. If you have any one of the following symptoms, a high temperature, a new continuous cough, loss of taste or smell, you can now get tested. Do not leave home for any reason other than to get tested. Find out how to get a test and how long to isolate at nhs.uk/coronavirus. Stay alert. Control the virus. Save lives.
You know that feeling when you get more than you expected? Like discovering that the box of chocolates has a whole other layer underneath, or scoring extra poppadoms with your takeaway, or joining Tesco Mobile and finding out you get the latest phones and 99% UK network coverage. Yeah, that moment feels good, right? Tesco Mobile. Every little helps.
99% 4G population coverage indoors and outdoors across UK.
Where will 2020 take you? Somewhere where people care about each other, about our planet, about creating a better world for everyone, and becoming the best versions of yourselves. Join a community of like-minded individuals at the University of Winchester. Make sure to accept your offer by the UCAS deadline and visit our website to find out more. See the bigger picture. Be the difference. Go to winchester.ac.uk.
Picture this. Small businesses on eBay are working to
get things moving.
Sending spices to novice cooks.
Airbags to kids.
Desks for home offices.
Delivering the goods.
Shipping footballs.
Fruit trees.
And dishwashers.
Thousands of small businesses on eBay are helping to keep the nation going. They are individually brilliant, stronger as one. Buy, sell, eBay.
Wondering what to play next? Want to know what other TuneIn listeners are listening to right now? Head to the trending section under Browse to explore the most popular stations and podcasts on TuneIn today. Millions of listeners like you can't be wrong.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
Let's be honest, we all spend too much of our day on social media. But at least you can spend your endless scroll time to discover new things on TuneIn. Follow @TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to always be in the know about the best new stuff streaming in the app. From breaking news stories and live sporting events.
Yeah, but it's unique times. I think there's unique circumstances, and we're trying
to stand out stations and podcasts. Stay in touch with TuneIn.
And breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and on Quick take by Bloomberg. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From Bloomberg World Headquarters, I'm Charlie Pelleton. Another day of exuberance on Wall Street, with the Dow now up by 401 points, up 1.6%. Stocks extending the rally, with a gauge of global equities rising for an 8th straight day as investors cling to optimism for a quick economic recovery from the pandemic. Banks leading the S&P 500 index toward a 3-month high. S&P up another 33 points, back above 3,100, now at 3,114, up 1.1%. NASDAQ up 55, that's a gain of 0.6%. We've got the 10-year down 24/30 seconds, the yield now 0.76%. Gold down 1.6%, $16.99 the ounce. West Texas Intermediate crude oil down 0.2%, now $36.75 a barrel. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Bloomberg Opinion, informed perspectives, and expert data-driven commentary on breaking news.
It's time now for Bloomberg Opinion, and we welcome today columnist and Bloomberg Markets editor, John Authers. John, thank you so much for joining us. So another detestable rally, that's what you call your piece today, which I read first thing this morning, and it seems fair enough. Tell us why it is detestable, why people are dumping all over this rally as it keeps going. Doesn't stop.
Well, a lot of people are dumping on it because they've missed out on it.
There you have it.
Deny being part of it myself, but plainly there are more buyers than sellers. People have pointed out, but those who are not buying, those who have not bought yet, are doing so because they really think this is mad. What's going on? Plainly, the reason people feel this uncomfortable about this strong a rally at this point is the extremity of what we're seeing on our TV screens. There's yet another bad headline about U.S.-China relations today. U.S.-China relations had the entire global markets transfixed all of last year. Nobody seems to have noticed that the U.S. is cutting off Chinese airlines from flying to the U.S. Then obviously the COVID story continues not to go away. We only really have one precedent for it, and that's 1918. And there was a huge, far worse second wave in the fall of 1918. There's only one precedent. It's not statistically, doesn't statistically prove terribly much, but it does suggest that there's a risk that we haven't seen the end of COVID. And dominating the conversation, I don't know if you're actually back in the Bloomberg office yet.
No, I'm in my basement up in Westchester.
Yeah, I was in the neighborhood yesterday because I had a doctor's appointment. The glass in the stores of all the stores at the bottom of the Bloomberg office building have been smashed in. There were people clearing up broken glass on the sidewalk. That's generally, you would think, would put people in a very seriously bearish frame of mind. So I think those are the reasons why it's hated. I mean, the people add that the places where there have been the greatest issues with COVID and where there are now issues with the unrest on the streets are also big financial centers, most obviously New York City, and you can see why this is making people so uncomfortable. And obviously, when this is a strong pain trade, it tends to continue happening. There are still plenty more people left to capitulate.
So as you say, John, there seems to be a disconnect between what we see in the television news or here on the radio news, which seems pretty dire in various fronts, and not just the civil unrest. I mean, coronavirus has not gone away. We've not gotten a vaccine, and the economic numbers continue to come in pretty bad. But there seems to be a disconnect. I talked to Jay Clayton, the chairman of the SEC yesterday. He said, no, this is pretty simple. The equity markets are just looking at future earnings. So what's the disconnect between some of the really bad news we're seeing right now and future earnings? Why will companies make just as much money even if these things go wrong?
Well, there are. I would agree, although I'm beginning to get nervous given the state of the rally. The last time I tried running the numbers, if you have a really pure V-shaped recovery in earnings, then you can maybe just about, if you cross your fingers, justify the rally of where we have come back to. If earnings by the end of next year have got back to where they were at the end of last year. That, however, really does involve pricing for perfection, it seems to me. It requires belief that global trade will return. so that you get the advantages of the lower cost operators and so that you can export. And it also requires a belief that consumers return at 100% of their previous capacity, which without a vaccine seems pretty unlikely. My parents are in their 80s. They're not going to be getting out and buying stuff as much as they used to until they get a vaccine. And that's true of everybody much over the age of 65, I would think. And the point is, an economy running at 90% of capacity is a serious recession. That's 10% below where it was before the very serious recession. So yes, you're right. I think Clayton is right about that. That's what people are seeing. They've got bullish views on earnings, which might justify it. But there's no upside and a lot of downside from those bullish views of future earnings.
Well, perhaps most important is what do you do about it? And you have sort of a plan or a solution that you, and you give credit to Ben Inker of Boston-based fund manager GMO LLC. Basically, go long value and short the index, the S&P index.
Yes. GMO is perhaps best known for Jeremy Grantham, who is the G of GMO. Yes. Ben Inker is his current brilliant right-hand man. Yes, the idea there is you're still obviously not going to gain to the full extent that you would if this rally really proves right, but value really got killed in the sell-off. It's had a bad decade, and it had a really terrible last few months. It has begun to outperform growth in the last few days, and that makes sense because generally value stocks may be too cheap. That's why they're interesting. They will be cheap for a reason. If you see growth return, if you see